Your sitting is resumed.
Mr. Speaker, sir, you've heard to announcements. We're going back. We're going back to announcements. So the Speaker will give me minutes.
Minutes of 4th February 2022, 8th February 2022, 15th February 2022, and the 21st of February 2022 to be confirmed. Honourable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move that the aforesaid minutes be confirmed.
The questions that the aforesaid minutes be confirmed. All those honourable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. The aforesaid minutes are hereby confirmed.
Revert to government business, sir. Order number 4. In the name of the Honourable Prime Minister and Minister of Finance and Economic Affairs, to move the second reading of the appropriation bill, at which time the Prime Minister will deliver the budgetary proposals for 2022. Okay. Sorry, sir. Order number 4. In the name of the Honourable Prime Minister and Minister of Finance and Economic Affairs, to move the second reading of the Appropriation Bill 2022, at which time the Honourable Prime Minister will deliver the budgetary proposals for the year 2022.
Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm going to repeat myself again. It is good to be back home. Anytime you leave any home for 2 years, you must feel good when you return. But it is particularly good, Mr. Speaker, to be back in this historic Parliament at Bridgetown. And I want to thank all who worked beyond the call of duty to allow us to be here today. We know that the work is not yet completed and that there is still, Mr. Speaker, work to be done. But we felt that it was important that we come home. And even though the journey ahead of us may be rough as it is nationally, we can make it because we have the capacity and the resilience and the commitment so to do. Thank you to all of the workers who have put us in this position today. And I also want to thank all those who accommodated us at the Ernst & Young Corporate Center at Worthing in Christchurch for the last 2 years. Mr. Speaker, this is in fact the first occasion that this Parliament will be meeting to complete the budgetary arrangements for the country for 2022 to 2023 since the last election of January 19th, 2022. You must expect, therefore, that I would want at the outset to thank all of Barbados, all Barbadians, for the manner in which we were able to execute and manage the transition of our democratic responsibilities in the middle of a pandemic. It is a credit to us all as a nation, sir. Please let me also express the sincere gratitude to Barbadians for the confidence reposed in me and in all members of Parliament who have been elected in this House in this historic election that has seen the results that we have. Sir, we do not take the confidence that is reposed in us lightly. And indeed, sir, we understand the gravity of the moment, the challenging times, and the broken world in which we live. And we understand that you have asked us to chart this country's journey to become, you, the people of Barbados, Mr. Speaker, to chart this country's journey to become world-class by 2030, and in so doing, to take as many Barbadians as we can on that journey, and to protect and shield those who, for whatever reason, cannot make that journey on their own. That is who we are, Mr. Speaker. The people have also asked us to keep this country and them safe. We are all cognizant of the uncertainty of the times in which we live. We see it daily. But I have no doubt that we will be sure-footed. Working together, the government and the people will play each ball as it comes, however difficult the pitch is, but matching the ball with the strokes that are necessary to get it to the boundary and for the runs to be put on the board. I want to thank also, Mr. Speaker, all of the social partners for making contributions and for expressing their views as to where the individual sectors may be at this point and what they believe to be suitable for them at this juncture. Even when the government is unable to respond to the requests being made at the individual level by the social partners, we could, for the most part, understand the motivation behind the requests. But we do need to have some conversations, because some of the requests continue to be things that we have put behind us, not just in this government, but by previous governments going as far back as Sir Lloyd Sandiford and coming forward. There was one exception with respect to what I could understand and didn't understand. Yesterday morning I read the press, and in the press there were comments coming from one quarter in particular, asking that the government deliver a guarantee in this country that prices will not increase. Mr. Speaker, this is as unbelievable as it is irresponsible. And it saddens me that those who are urging us so to do not yet understand that the world in which we live can provide no such assurances. Or do they understand what they're dealing with? And you may ask whether they're not seeking to mislead the public or to give the public a false sense of comfort that cannot be given. In this regard, it is fortunate for the rest of us that Parliament cannot and will not be misled on this occasion, given its composition. I ask you, therefore, to echo and to recognize, Mr. Speaker, that there is no single policy to control what is patently a global problem with respect to inflation and prices. The combination of the pandemic, the disruption of the supply chain globally, and now, Mr. Speaker, the war in Ukraine, means that there are multiple causes for price increases that are, quite frankly, beyond the border and control of national governments, not just the government of Barbados, no matter where those national governments are located, and no matter how powerful those national governments are. Mr. Speaker, small nation states like ours are particularly vulnerable to these external circumstances, what the economists like to call exogenous shocks. And the very real challenge is how we reduce the buffeting of these mighty global winds. It is my intention, sir, today to present what I believe a responsible government, genuinely caring about the safety and welfare of our people, can and will do. To trigger growth, equitable growth, to shield our populations where necessary, and to ensure that we come forward with a level of fiscal responsibility that will allow us to maintain credibility in the world in which we function. One of the greatest characteristics, sir, of the Barbadian people is to be found not in never falling, but in rising every time when we fall. Mr. Speaker, sir, a little under 2 years ago, indeed, it mirrored our journey to the other place in Worthing, Christchurch. For I remember on March 20th, 2020, as we closed this debate, having determined that we did not need to have a financial and budgetary statement that would impose anything or relieve anything off of people, given the extensive nature of the changes made in 2019, we were forced then to make adjustments to our welfare vote and to a number of other things to start to shield and protect Barbadians at the beginning. Indeed, our first case of COVID was the 17th of March 2020, and that debate closed on the 20th of March 2020. Mr. Speaker, that COVID led to a shutdown of Barbados almost immediately thereafter, we all remember. And it was not the only shutdown. It shut down our tourism and travel industry. it shut down our businesses, and it kept people at home. It affected our lives in a way that no one could have anticipated. Visitors to our island fell from almost 70,000 in March 2020 to almost 1,000 visitors in April of 2020. I'd like to repeat myself. Visitors' arrivals fell from 70,000 visitors in March 2020 to just about 1,000 in April 2020. We all know that thereafter there were months when the airport was effectively a ghost town. By the end of May 2020, within 2 months of making that statement on March 20th, 2020, about 32,000 individuals, or 44% of the members of the National Insurance Scheme, had claimed against the unemployment fund. 32,000 people had claimed against the National Insurance Fund. Mr. Speaker, the scheme's founders could never, ever have contemplated such a possibility when that scheme was founded by the then Right Honourable J.M.G.M. Adams when he introduced unemployment benefit in the early 1980s in this country as one of the suite of benefits in the National Insurance Scheme of this country. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, as a result of COVID, the government's fiscal position went from a primary surplus of 6% of GDP in 2019-2020 to a 1% primary deficit in that same year of 2020 to 2021 when COVID became a reality. In the first year of COVID, the government lost $600 million of tax revenues, a reduction of just about 30%, relative to what we were projecting prior to the pandemic that we would have received. And this was largely as a result of our having to shut down the economy to keep Barbadians safe in those early days. Mr. Speaker, the COVID-related expenses in that fiscal year of 2020 to 21 was approximately $390 million. The combined impact of loss of revenue and additional expenditure meant an adjustment just shy of $1 billion Barbados dollars. No one, not the father of independence, nor those coming ever since, could have contemplated the shock that this economy was to have received as a result of this pandemic. Might I remind us that the last global pandemic was the Spanish flu. And as I have pointed out, those turbulent times of 100 years ago, small island developing states simply did not exist, and we were all colonies and parts of great empires who sought to do as they would, when they wanted, if they wanted. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, this government, however, did not have that luxury. We spent to ensure social stability, to ease people's pain and suffering, and to allow every Barbadian of every social class some measure of dignity against the social and economic assaults that COVID inflicted. In a night that seemed to bring out our darkest hour, our task was to keep the candles of every Barbadian aflame, the candle of survival, and indeed, Mr. Speaker, the candle of hope. And as a result, as a country, we came through the night and thought we were looking towards the dawn. And then, Mr. Speaker, in fact, I remember it only so well because there were those who thought we had conspired with nature to have La Soufrière erupt, because we had removed the restrictions, if you would recall, allowing people greater movement. And then, on the 9th of April 2021, La Soufrière erupted 90 miles away. And then, Mr. Speaker, in the month of June, the freak storm came with 46,000 lightning strikes in 90 minutes. And then, Mr. Speaker, 2 weeks later, Hurricane Elsa, the first hurricane to hit our land in 66 years, came. And if I may, for the purposes of Hansard, capture it in just 3 lines. The worst ashfall in 119 years since 1902 in Barbados. Similarly then caused by an eruption of La Soufrière in St. Vincent. The worst pandemic in 102 years. And indeed, Mr. Speaker, the first hurricane in 66 years. But, Mr. Speaker, we came through them all together as a people. Mr. Speaker, sir, in these anxious and uncertain times, it would be politically profitable for me to claim victory and to reassure you of a short return of the routine of the past, to the known, to the comfortably familiar. But it is my duty, sir, to tell you that steadily but surely a shadow has descended and the world in which we live has regrettably changed. It was changing even before the Russian troops breached the territorial sovereignty of the Ukraine at 5 o'clock in the morning on the 24th of February, less than a month ago. The world has become a riskier place than the one we have been used to. And the sad reality is that the overuse, for example, of antibiotics in rich countries and in agricultural production means that today we are more at risk of new viral pandemics than ever before. I have already shared with the country that regrettably we now know that these superviruses are killing as many as 1 million people a year across the world. And that is why I take some of the time that I have as Prime Minister of Barbados to help co-chair the Global One Health Initiative, because this potentially will become the biggest killer of human beings by 2050 if left unchecked. Reliance as well, Mr. Speaker, on cheap imported processed foods, in part as a consequence of international trade agreements, has created in Barbados today an epidemic of non-communicable diseases like diabetes, like heart disease, like hypertension, and the failure to control some of them leading to kidney disease and other difficulties related to which our people are being literally fallen prey to. The digital revolution is reordering global trade in goods, labor, and capital, spawning new economic empires. We now see who amasses the wealth in the world. Hitherto, it was the banks and the insurance companies alone. Today, the technology companies occupy that place of primacy with respect to wealth creation. Ensuring that we remain free in this world, Mr. Speaker, requires a constancy of mind and a persistency of purpose. 200 years of industrialization in the Northern Hemisphere has also changed the world's physical and biological systems, so that we are now racing towards an increase in average temperatures of 1.5 degrees, the tipping point above which the glaciers melt and the sea levels rise, and we on the front line start to wonder what God we are serving. The multilateral institutions needed to provide fair and equitable solutions to these global problems were fashioned regrettably by those who won World War II, those who had the empires, and indeed the vast majority of the world at that time lived under the great European empires. I fear that today they have neither legitimacy nor capability to do the job, and the absence of the effective action from the multilateral systems is causing us greater damage as small island developing states and as people of the Southern Hemisphere. Our response to this new world cannot be to pretend that it is not happening, to continue along our old path unperturbed. It requires, Mr. Speaker, a different governance, financial, economic, and regional response. It requires governments that are more agile and responsive than governments of the past, able to press on the gas and then on the brakes as appropriate. I use that metaphor because that is the metaphor that allowed us to get through this pandemic as one people. And every time we spoke, I would tell you and remind the Barbadian public, there will be times when we will press on the gas, and there will be times when we will have to press the brakes. And what we cannot do is to be so stuck in our ways that we lose the nimbleness that is required for success. Without perhaps fully appreciating that this was the new normal, governments in the future, Mr. Speaker, will be guided less by rigid conventions, but more by a mix of principle and a response to rapid information. Our needs in Barbados are those of our brothers and sisters in CARICOM. We face the same challenges, and we must, as small island developing states or other state partners within the Caribbean community, also consider what our common responses and solutions should be. Mr. Speaker, in this uncertainty and the peril of the times, what principles guide us? I ask us to remember the covenant of hope, which we made with the Barbadian people, appropriately so, at Solidarity House in 2016. That covenant of hope has become even more vital and important in this new world, in guiding us as a nation and as a people to the values, and in it we know what we stand for, what we shall fight for, and what lies ahead of us. On the night of its presentation, we had defined our principles and priorities. They remain the same. And we set ourselves the goal of a safe, prosperous, and socially just Barbados, where all of our people are able to choose the preferred paths for their lives, and where our country invests in social protection for those in need. We anticipated an unstable world even as far back as then, and accepted that we would invariably face periods of economic adjustment and uncertainty. We did not promise the end of peril, only that whatever its nature, whatever its gravity, we would work together as one people to remedy it. But we committed that we would follow the overarching principle that the burden of adjustment must be shared fairly. Mr. Speaker, it was the principle that we enunciated within the first 4 weeks of becoming the government of this nation as we delivered the first budgetary statement from this very location. Share the burden and share the benefits. Or as I would often say, share the burden and share the bounty. There's some who don't like the word bounty, but I know it does well for a lot of people. Mr. Speaker, when times of plenty return, prosperity must be shared. And when difficult times are upon us, we must share the burden equitably. Or as I never tire in saying, many hands make light work. Our covenant with the people of Barbados embraced the vision of a modern, globally competitive economy, built upon a foundation of a fair share for workers, opportunities of ownership for all, and adequate returns on private investment, effective deployment of new technologies across the public and private sectors, a credible, efficient legal system, and access to renewable energy resources and cheap and fast internet as well. Presciently, we envisage the importance of nutrition, energy, and water security, and the protection of our natural and built environments from our roofs to reefs to support inclusive and equitable growth. And we emphasize the importance of fiscal responsibility and debt sustainability because we knew where the absence of it took us as a nation. We stressed resilience to enable our country to face the challenges, whatever they were. When times are uncertain, these are the goals and principles upon which we draw. Our compass. We have used this compass in preparation of our budgetary measures to be announced today. We hope that in them, you will see that we have been faithful to our covenant with you, that our supreme task is the safety and well-being of our people, and in pursuing that, we are trying to share the burdens and share the benefits as equitably as we can. Mr. Speaker, the initiatives to boost the spread of ownership and the use of technology are critical and vital to our survival at this point. And we try to do all of this, Mr. Speaker, in today's presentation in a fiscally responsible manner, while still triggering equitable growth and shielding the people who need to be shielded. This year, 2021, was sent to remind us that if we want to preserve Barbadian pride and Barbadian independence, if we are to roll with every punch thrown at us, respond to every challenge, sir, we must continuously sow, nourish, and expand our resilience, including fiscal resilience. We must plant and we must build. For the Bible teaches us in Ecclesiastes that there is a time and season for everything. The truth and fact is, Mr. Speaker, we were lucky. COVID, Soufriere, and Elsa, the freak storm, did not strike us at the end of that lost decade of 2008 to 2018. Could you only imagine if we had to face all three of them before having the opportunity to save the Barbados dollar? Could you imagine what would have been the fate of this nation and the people of this nation if we had to confront these challenges, Mr. Speaker, before we had the opportunity to restructure our debt, to deal with the arrears and the payables, and to save the value of the Barbados dollar? Mr. Speaker, Barbados was being strangled then by high and costly debt, failing infrastructure that I don't need to spend time reminding you of this evening, and a flight of capital. Servicing the debt alone, paying interest and paying back due debts, took up 68 cents in the dollar. I well remember the speech by the then Prime Minister, the Right Excellent Owen Seymour Arthur, as he spoke at the end of this front bench, reminding us that this country could not carry that level of debt service and that we needed to take action urgently, because what was left was 32 cents, Mr. Speaker, to run our schools and our clinics, to defend this nation through our borders and within the borders through police, to deal with our hospitals, to fix roads, to deal with drainage, to buy buses, to stop the sewage, to buy garbage trucks, to pay wages, and to pay pensions, and many, many more things. 32 cents in the dollar was all that was left. And hence the determination of this government that its first responsibility was to work with the social partnership and the people of this nation to save the value of the Barbados dollar and to restructure our debt. Mr. Speaker, there was no room to breathe and invest in the future, far less to respond to any new challenges. Creditors saw the writing on the wall, and the unscrupulous circled and demanded a high premium, 11% interest rate, to lend Barbados money in 2017 because of what was then a high-risk status. And on top of that, we had what has now come to be called adversarial financing. In other words, not paying your debts. Adversarial financing that saw a significant buildup of arrears from nothing in 2008, no arrears in 2008, to almost $2 billion by the time we took over the government in 2018. 2021 taught us, Mr. Speaker, that we must always have gas in the tank, reserves, and a plan. Our Girl Guides and Boy Scouts know that. And it is time that we know it as a country and as a government. Always be prepared. Mr. Speaker, that 3 weeks of import cover could have carried us nowhere. Today, after the worst of COVID, the worst of Soufriere, the worst of Hurricane Elsa and the freak storm, the governor of the central bank has advised me this morning that Barbados' reserves stand at $3.058 billion on the 11th of March of this year. That is the equivalent, Mr. Speaker, I'm told, of 40 weeks of import cover from the dread 3 weeks that this government inherited. That we have achieved this in spite of all of the challenges to which I've referred is a signal attribute to be enjoyed not by the government of Barbados, but by the people and nation of Barbados. And Mr. Speaker, we built that war chest at a good pace, yes, through some long-term, low-interest official borrowing. But the difference was that nobody was lending to the last government. And there is not a single country in the world today that has gotten through the pandemic without borrowing. Not one single country. What is the difference, sir? That our interest rates at which we borrowed today to get us through this period in the last 4 years, just shy of 4 years, have been at 1%, 2%, and 4%. Not the 11%, 12%, and 14% of the last government. We have not borrowed at interest rates that would kill the children of this nation. I understand, sir, that when you step back from the brink, talking of building defenses is not exciting to some people. But in this new world, in this era in which we live, this is how a responsible government shields people from whatever the future may bring. And you may ask, what is that Barbadian shield? Sir, that Barbadian shield shields people, not numbers. That Barbadian shield shields people, not numbers. They're shielding the aunt who lives in Pike Corner, St. Lucie. They're shielding the little young fella in Bush Hall. They're shielding the grandparents in St. Philip or in Workman's in St. George. They're shielding the church group in Deacons. Let me remind the House of some of the ways in which this government chose to shield people, but more importantly, is continuing to shield people in this nation. Mr. Speaker, we shielded them against the severe ravages of the pandemic. We created benefits, new NIS benefits that did not exist. The business interruption benefit did not exist. There was nothing for self-employed persons. The government also supported the NIS with a liquidity payout of more than $150 million. Mr. Speaker, we could not do it unless we had access to cheap long-term capital that would allow us to stabilize the national insurance scheme that is to be depended on by so many of us. Not just pensioners, but those with sickness benefit, maternity benefit, injury benefit. Let's get real. Mr. Speaker, we created the BEST program to support the tourism industry before the tourists returned in their numbers, to ensure that their plant was maintained. There was nothing more debilitating than going down the coast of Barbados and seeing every hotel shut down, wondering what the heat would do to the tiles and the pipes, and whether the cost of dilapidation would be beyond the owners of the hotels once the tourists came back. We understood our duty to make sure that employment remained, even if not full levels and full payment, to be able to keep as many of our workers engaged as is possible. Mr. Speaker, in March of 2020, we increased the welfare rates and we expanded the range of benefits under welfare. Mr. Speaker, we also introduced in 2020 a household mitigation unit. We had introduced it actually before, but we expanded it in 2020. We introduced it when the layoffs came initially, and we expanded it in 2020 significantly, and also introduced to the country the Adopt a Family program, to which Barbadians of all backgrounds generously contributed. Mr. Speaker, without that household mitigation unit, there would have been families who would have had no protection against privation. None. Mr. Speaker, we built and equipped a brand new hospital at Harrison's Point to safeguard our ordinary service at Queen Elizabeth Hospital so that people would not be otherwise disproportionately exposed to COVID in our main hospital. Mr. Speaker, it was an act of great prescience on the part of this government to ensure that we were able to separate out those patients. And, Mr. Speaker, above all else, it expanded our ICU capacity with oxygen from the 33 or 35 beds of the QE8 for the last 50 years to over, Mr. Speaker, 130 beds as it stands today. Mr. Speaker, we completed a new accident and emergency department in the middle of the pandemic. And were we not capable of finishing that, we would have been in serious trouble in terms of the distance rules that would have had to have been put in place at the old A&E. Indeed, the new A&E just brought us back to existing capacity. But if we did not have that additional space, we would be in trouble today. Mr. Speaker, we built a new St. Joseph and St. Andrew outpatients clinic where the ones that we inherited were dilapidated and closed down. Mr. Speaker, we got water connection to those waiting for several years in the parish of St. Joseph and St. John when they were without water for years. Mr. Speaker, we purchased and obtained vaccines and medical equipment to protect the nation. These are parts of the Barbadian Shield. We expanded the Capital Works program, and the work, as you will hear later in this debate continues. And of course, Mr. Speaker, we deliberately engaged additional workers. And why? We gave out care packages. We gave out vouchers thanks to the Sandy Lane Trust, and we thank them yet again. The care packages were paid for by the government of Barbados in the second lockdown. But, Mr. Speaker, we understood that if we didn't create opportunities for people to work, how would they feed their families? And it is against that backdrop, sir, that I refer to those workers who we brought on to deal with the ash, to deal with the debushing and beautification across the country, engaged by the Ministry of Public Works, engaged by the National Conservation Commission, the Community Elder Program, the primary school monitors. Mr. Speaker, we spent significant sums of money, and I record it now for the benefit of this House, because the people of this nation must know how we use fiscal measures to create the human shield to protect Bajans. 233 workers at the primary school COVID monitors at a price of $4.2 million. Community elder care, $8.4 million roughly for 444 workers. The ash cleanup, 1,500 workers working there and continuing with MTW in beautification and debushing on the highways. And then those working in the NCC, that 1,500 workers, cost us $38.5 million and continues to. Volcanic ash workers, specifically alone at the Ministry of Housing and National Housing Corporation, they were brought on for a limited period because of the housing estates and the housing assets of NHC, and that cost us 155 workers, cost us $3.1 million. They also brought on 36 workers after Hurricane Nelson, which cost us $771,000. And the community health liaison officers costed us $5.2 million for the 323 people that have been working to help keep this nation safe. Mr. Speaker, that is a sum of about $77 million, $76,609,992 to be precise, for 3,590 Barbadian families to be able to weather the worst ravages of the world that we have seen in a century. Mr. Speaker, this was a deliberate step. And I repeat it as I did in the last election when there were those who sought to berate this government for the engagement of those workers. This was a deliberate choice to shield workers. And we have said to them, for those who have told them that they're going home right away or that we're not, we've told them, look, we will transition you to the private economy because we expect the capital projects in this year to mushroom. And indeed, that is why once we introduce the construction gateway training, those of you who don't have training can easily go there. And then the other aspects that we expect to see significant employment in is digitization as we go forward. Mr. Speaker, we will protect them for as long as it takes to get the transition into the capital projects, into the construction, into the digitization, because they're not foreigners, they're not aliens, they are Barbadians. So, Mr. Speaker, sir, COVID, as we hear all the time from the Honourable Member from St. Michael West Central now, who has replaced, and all members in here will forgive me if I, in this debate, pay special tribute to our brother, Lieutenant Colonel Jeffrey Bostic. Who led this country's efforts in the pandemic with absolute courage and dignity. There shall be no retreat. There shall be no surrender. But it's not gone. And the member for St. Michael West Central and the member for St. Philip North take the responsibility for leading this country as we go forward. And we thank them for that too. But we recognize that even as we speak and even as we manage reasonably well, that we have to keep our eyes open and to be ever vigilant. For we see in China cities and areas being closed down. and other parts of the world where they are looking to see how best they can contain. Eternal vigilance must be our watchwords in this battle. There is no gainsaying that we must continue, therefore, to shield our people against what I call the long-term economic effects and supply disruptions caused by COVID, and now, of course, by the geopolitical instability caused by the war in Europe. It is tempting to consider, and I've heard it said in some quarters, that this is a faraway war that has little to do with us. Indeed, the only thing people didn't tell me to do is drink water and mind my own business. But they told me to mind my own business, and I will drink some water now. The truth is, sir, how the world responds to Russia's invasion of the Ukraine determines the status and value of territorial sovereignty the world over for a generation. We only became colonies because somebody invaded us. So the concept of invasion and the offensive principle of incurring breaches, of attacking countries and people on territorial sovereignty is a principle for which Barbadians will always fight. We fought for it when people sought to comment on Venezuela. And we said that we were supporting because you could not declare a president that was not part and parcel of your remit so to do. That those were matters for the Venezuelan people. And just as we said it for Venezuela, we say it for Ukraine. Why? Because friends of all, satellites of none, the principles remain that which guides us. The invasion, my friends, could register a fatal blow as well to multilateralism, upon which the independence of our small states rests. For we have no armies of any major size. We have no nuclear arsenal or weapons to defend ourselves. Apart from all of that, the invasion of Ukraine by Russia will have a profound effect on the cost of living for those same people in Pike Corner, Bush Hall, Workman's, all over this country. So it is our business, even if we are a small nation. The global oil market is tight. You have heard the member for St. James South Central repeatedly in the last few weeks turn our minds as a nation to that reality. Just a 1 percentage point shock to supply and demand pushes prices up or down significantly. And in trying to gauge the breadth of the consequences, let us bear in mind that Russia exports alone around 10% of the world's supply of oil. It is perhaps why others are making friends where they were reluctant to make friends previously. This time last year, the price of oil on the international markets was $65. $65 per barrel. Last week, my friends, prices reached a peak of $127 a barrel, an increase of almost 100%. Nothing best captures what we face as a nation than that picture. The political and military situation remains highly uncertain and volatile, as do oil prices. And Russia also converts a fair amount of its gas into nitrogen fertilizers and exports around 13% of the world's fertilizers. So there will be an impact, Mr. Speaker, on food prices. Russia and the Ukraine alone account for 30% of the world's grain exports and provide at least 50% of the wheat needs of 26 countries in Africa, in Asia, and on the European continent itself. Mr. Speaker, in addition, these two countries are also major suppliers of edible oils, making an already tenuous food situation especially dangerous, not just for Europe, but indeed, Mr. Speaker, for the whole world. The world will face serious tribulations on the matters of food, energy, and by extension, financing. The most comprehensive measure of global food prices, the FAO's Food Price Index, shows that food prices have already hit an all-time record in February of this year. Even prior to the invasion, There were supply chain disruptions and especially higher freight costs as a result of the COVID-related shutdowns in China and other major exporters. Consumer spending on goods has rebounded, but the global supply chain has been unable to keep up with the demand. Shortages have been felt in areas from microchips to bicycle components. This has already pushed up the price of imported items, from food, vehicles, and consumer items. Mr. Speaker, sir, the Baltic Exchange Index of Freight Costs has increased 118% over the last 12 months. I want to repeat myself, sir. The Baltic Exchange Index of Freight Costs has increased 118% over the last 12 months, Mr. Speaker, but 610% over the last 2 years. A six-fold increase in shipping costs had to have a major impact on the price of goods, and that is what we have been facing, not just in Barbados, but across the world. There has been a pronounced tilt in inflation expectations, with comparisons now being made to the stagflationary environment of the 1970s. Global financial markets now fully expect that the U.S. Federal Reserve will increase interest rates from as early as this week and continuing throughout 2022, trying to deal with surging inflation. The European Central Bank and the Bank of England have started to tighten monetary policy. And of concern is that a rising interest rate environment introduces uncertainty into global financial markets and may make access to international investors more difficult for emerging market countries. We have already seen some of the effects here in our country. It is unclear whether we have seen the greater part or how long it may last. But this uncertainty is also damaging for our consumers and our industry. Mr. Speaker, we understand the strain Barbadians are facing with higher costs of living. We see it, we feel it, and we hear them. And both oil and freight price increases are particularly impactful on our consumers because they cannot switch to alternatives overnight. But there's no magic wand, as I said at the outset of this speech. There's no single silver bullet. It would be irresponsible to promise this reality. But we will shield as best we can. But there is also still a limit to what a government can do about prices that have been set internationally in circumstances where there is almost no ceiling of how far those prices can rise. None of us know where oil will end up ultimately if this war continues. None of us know where freight costs will end up. None of us know where financing costs may ultimately end up. None of us know where food costs may ultimately end up. And that is why the international community and the United Nations Secretary General himself is peculiarly and particularly concerned about the impact, as I said, with respect to food, of energy, and of financing as we go forward as a global community. Sir, we could not guarantee to consumers low prices for domestic goods while simultaneously having taxpayers pay the higher international price. That would be Barbados writing a blank check to international oil and shipping companies while putting our own producers at a disadvantage. We cannot allow the prices for the international sector to be imported without any fetters. Investors and rating agencies would quickly rumble that we had built ourselves a bottomless pit. Rich countries with far greater resources than ours and an ability to borrow and finance infinitely greater than our own, or to have access to quantitative easing, have not guaranteed those lower prices. But what we are committed to do, Mr. Speaker, is to do what is possible for a nation such as ours. And we shall extend the Barbadian shield in a very carefully targeted way, sir. Thank you. Many decisions to purchase, consume, or produce are made as a matter of necessity. And so we hope that well-timed, even if limited, protection can make that difference to our people. Mr. Speaker, sir, in addition to excise taxes which are flat amounts, not impacted by higher prices, oil and freight carry ad valorem taxes where the amount of tax is linked to the price of the product. VAT is an ad valorem tax. Currently, for instance, with the price at the pump at $4.13, the government receives 61 cents of value-added tax per liter of gas. When the oil price rises or falls, the amount of value-added tax raised will also rise or fall because it's ad valorem. It's a percentage of an amount. The government currently needs all the tax revenues it can collect. That is true. And we must do so to get back to where we were before COVID. But we do not need to collect even more revenues from the consumption of oil and freight. And therefore, the adjustments must come here. The government can only reduce the amount of VAT that it receives, not the international price that we pay to buy oil. I want to make this point. We cannot reduce the price at which we purchase oil. And we cannot go back to the old days of subsidizing oil because it will break us. But what we can do is control the amount of taxes that we take from the oil which is purchased. I want to remind us as well that when we see a price stated for oil on the international market, that is not the price that BNOC buys it at, because the price we see is in fact the price for crude oil. What we buy is refined product, gasoline and diesel, fuel oil, so that more often than not there is a $5, $6, or $7 US increase on top of what you see as the crude oil price. Mr. Speaker, it is against that backdrop, therefore, sir, that we propose to cap the dollar amount of VAT payable on petrol to 47 cents per litre from the 61 cents. And we shall do so effective midnight Wednesday, March 16th, initially for 6 months. I give the House the assurance that at the end of the 6 months, we may well have to look and see what further adjustments have to be made. But in this environment, we have to walk sure-footed. This means, Mr. Speaker, once adjusted from midnight tomorrow night, night after, Wednesday, March 16th, the government, therefore, will see the price, or Barbadians will see the price of oil at the pump go from $4.13 to $3.99 immediately on Wednesday. Similarly, in the case of diesel, sir, we will cap the dollar amount of value-added tax payable to 37 cents per litre, effective midnight on same Wednesday, March 16th, initially for 6 months. This means that the current international prices should bring down the price of a litre of diesel from $3.46 to $3.32. Mr. Speaker, the government is effectively transferring these 14 cents per litre of gas in VAT revenue and 14 cents per litre of diesel of VAT revenue to the consumers, delivering a collective saving to consumers, but at the same time costing the government of Barbados $25.2 million in lost revenue. This is a lot of money, and therefore you will appreciate that this is a sacrifice that we have to make for our people. Sir, if the war lasts longer or becomes more disruptive and oil prices rise, this transfer of VAT foregone by the government for the benefit of consumers will equally grow. But that which we do not receive, we do not miss. And therefore, we will work within the limits that we set. There are some who would have argued that we should have adjusted excise, but the reality is that in the price makeup, it would have had a bigger and more deleterious impact on government's revenue. And what we have chosen to do, therefore, is to cap the value of the take from the VAT at this level. Sir, Barbados imports nearly everything that we consume, regrettably. And I hope that one of the things that will come out of this difficult period is a commitment to produce more of what we eat and more of what we use. We will never be able to do all, but we can certainly do a lot more than we are doing now. According to the data submitted, therefore, to Asecuda World, average freight costs in 2019 and before COVID worth $7,350 per 20-foot container and $8,000 per 40-foot container. During 2021, at the height of the pandemic and global disruption of trade, the average price jumped to $20,000 and $24,650 respectively, 3 times the price of 2019. It was a common expectation around the world that over the course of the next 12 months, the post-COVID disruption to shipping would start to ease off by itself. But the current uncertainty presented, Mr. Speaker, by the Russia-Ukraine war has given us pause. It is possible that the scarcity of available freight ships continues for a while longer. And consequently, therefore, Mr. Speaker, effective midnight tonight, the government of Barbados will partially shield consumers from the increased freight costs by capping the cost of freight used for the purpose of calculating customs duties at the pre-COVID-19 levels of $7,350 per 20-foot container and $8,000 for 40-foot containers, and we shall hold these costs for 12 months, Mr. Speaker. This means, sir, that the government will forego revenue with respect to the escalation of shipping prices for the next 12 months until March 31st, 2023. It is difficult for us to calculate what the amount will be, largely because of the fluidity of imports into the system, into the country. These 2 measures will bring partial, but we believe significant relief to all Barbadian consumers. This is part of the Barbadian Shield. Let me turn, Mr. Speaker, to water for food and nutritional security. The Russian invasion again of Ukraine and the dislocation of the grain and other agricultural goods which I referred to earlier is a reminder of why we must provide greater food and nutrition security for our people. It was done during World War II. We can do it again. It was done with less capacity and resources. We can do it again. For agriculture to be sustainable in Barbados, there must be access to affordable water, especially for small farmers. And this requires water to be available as well as being cheap, or affordable, I should say. Mr. Speaker, the availability of water, therefore, has to be augmented through, 1, reducing the leakages experienced by the Barbados Water Authority, what they call non-revenue water, which is on or about almost 50%. In other words, half of what you pump comes back out in leaks. Reclaiming water, for example, at the South Coast Sewage Project that is coming on stream when we seek to treat it and to be able to use it for agricultural purposes. 3, trapping water in catchments as far as possible. And 4, expanding the use of desalination where possible. As we aim to increase the supply of water, it is imperative to set a standard rate for users in the agricultural sector that accommodates the country's objective of achieving food and nutritional security while also achieving fair and equitable growth. We therefore, Mr. Speaker, will introduce from the 1st of May 2022 a fixed rate for water of $1.80 per cubic meter across the agricultural sector. Mr. Speaker, this $1.80 represents a cubic meter, which is 220 gallons. So you are paying 180 cents for 220 gallons of water. I only need to remind you the value of water is not only seen in bulk, but if we go into the mini-mart or the shop and buy a liter of water, check the price of it, and then begin to see the equivalence of how we have kept water rates in this country relatively affordable. Mr. Speaker, the truth is that there are some farmers who have been paying less. Not many, they're not the majority, but they pay as a result of accessing water from BADMC when it is available. But equally, it is not always available. And regrettably, there has been a buildup of arrears on that scheme, even though the rate at that scheme has been 66 cents for 220 gallons of water, and that rate has been in place from the early 1970s. Mr. Speaker, that is unsustainable. We believe that the rate of $1.80 is absolutely affordable when we consider that the household rate for the first 8 cubic meters is $2.48 per cubic meter. Mr. Speaker, as of February 2022, 116 small farmers had registered with the Ministry of Agriculture, the Food and Nutritional Security for access to a special rate from the BWA. 7 were registered as livestock farmers, 10 in and others in crop production. And the rest of those farmers, except for 14 whose type of farming was not stated, would constitute the remaining amount of that 116. This new rate, Mr. Speaker, must be made available to all registered farmers with the Ministry of Agriculture. The current arrangements at the BADMC, where they extract water from wells that the BADMC controls and sells to farmers, will come to an end on the 30th of April, 2022. The truth is, Mr. Speaker, many people in this country do not know that there's a piece of legislation called the Underground Water Act, which was passed by Sir Grantley Adams's cabinet and the Parliament of Barbados in 1951, requiring persons who were abstracting water from private wells to seek permission before so doing. This act has been observed in the breach. I say to you, sir, today, that it cannot be that a water-scarce country in the middle of a climate crisis continues to have people extract water from private wells without measurement and without payment. And accordingly, sir, my government intends to start conversations with all persons who currently abstract water from private wells to see how best we may appropriately regulate and enforce and have a determined price for access to this water while monitoring the rates of extraction as a water-scarce country. I come now, Mr. Speaker, to the issue of zero rating for VAT for personal and critical care items. Mr. Speaker, in our manifesto, we gave a commitment that we should review the cost for some essential personal care items. Following that review, I'm happy to announce that from the 1st of April 2022, that all sanitary towels and tampons, baby and adult diapers, antiperspirants, vitamins and multiminerals will be zero rated for value-added tax purposes. This is a long overdue measure that I'm proud to introduce, and another component of protecting our people, shielding our people from the cost of living increases. But Mr. Speaker, health and wellness is also extremely important, as we know. And the pandemic has emphasized why it is critical to deal with chronic non-communicable diseases in our country, what we have come to call in the pandemic comorbidities. To assist in this fight, therefore, I propose to go further than where the manifesto went, and to zero rate a selected list of items which are used primarily to assist with the control of chronic diabetes, but also to provide meal supplements to people who are suffering badly. What are we talking about? Glucerna, Ensure, Entra-X, and I think there was one called Pedasure too. All of them are listed in Appendix E of the budgetary statement, and therefore you will be able to see those areas that we believe that families need a ease on, because when somebody in the house is sick, that is humbugging your head enough, and you don't really have to compound it with how you're going to find the money to buy what they need to keep them stable in their period of illness. To ensure the important tax relief measures that underpin this Barbados Shield are going to be passed on to the consumer, the Department of Commerce, under the leadership of the Minister of Commerce, the member for St. James Central, buttressed by the member for St. James South, will ensure that there will be price protocols published from accessing them from the private sector and public if necessary, and published every 2 weeks, the movement of prices, so that all Barbadians may see what prices are out there, and Barbadians can vote with their feet and their pocket where they need to go. I have similarly asked that monthly reports be prepared for submission to the Cabinet and through the Minister of Labour to the Social Partnership, so as to ensure that the sacrifice being borne by the taxpayers that I've announced today genuinely reaches the pockets of Barbadians where we need them to reach and are not used as part and parcel of the profit to be incurred by persons selling these products. My intent, sir, is to ensure that the reduction in prices is genuinely passed through to consumers. Mr. Speaker, we give faithful commitment that we shall continue to monitor these critical price trends in oil, in freight, in food, in personal care items, with a view to considering how we can continue to improve the effectiveness of the shield in accordance, I should say, with the depth of our pockets. We believe, sir, that similarly, the Department of Commerce, working with the Public, the Fair Trading Commission, the Barbados Revenue Authority, and the Customs and Excise Department can ensure that these savings do and reach where they need to reach, because we are all in this together. Mr. Speaker, with respect to the return of regionalism, let me pause here to speak, because faced with the limits of what we can do in response to a dangerous and volatile world, regionalism has become even more critical than ever before. And it is therefore fitting that at the same time that what the world offers us has dimmed, what the region is now willing to provide us has brightened. The light has come after a long night. So I can understand that many who hear me today will greet this idea with much skepticism. But I have learned to let actions speak for themselves. Perhaps the best sign of a different region is the regional agreement reached just a few weeks ago with the regional telecommunications companies to offer all CARICOM citizens reduced and capped roaming charges and a plan for their elimination once we can settle on a single regulatory body for telecommunications within the Caribbean community. Data, we know, is the new mode of production in the new digital economy. So that, my friends, Mr. Speaker, this is a significant development. Indeed, I remind us that Barbados has a trade surplus with only one region in the world. It is the Eastern Caribbean states. And therefore, when our people travel down there, they have been regrettably affected by high roaming rates that have affected the competitiveness of their enterprises. A more dangerous and volatile world equally requires more energy, food, and financial security, which is easier to obtain regionally than nationally. For instance, Mr. Speaker, we have spent much time, the Minister of Agriculture and Food Security and myself, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, meeting and working with the President of Guyana and many of his ministers and officials on several joint food production developments. I am happy to report to this Honourable Chamber that the President of Guyana has agreed that he will provide for Barbadian young people 25 new shade houses, prefab shade houses, which will be built and installed at Lears in the new Lears land lease project, and the government of Barbados has equally committed to purchase 25 more of those shade houses, so that there are 50 shade houses for a youth agricultural enterprise initiative to be located as part of the Lears land lease program. Mr. Speaker, we're particularly enthused too because the price of these shade houses have dropped. Our colleagues in St. Kitts, I think, were paying upwards of near what, 75,000 US for a shade house, and we're accessing these at 25,000 US dollars as we go forward. We've also agreed with them, Mr. Speaker, for the establishment of a Barbados-Guyana food terminal, which will also be located at Lears, which will see wholesale and retail of produce grown and imported to ensure that we can continue to drive down the prices of food in this country for all Barbadians. I am happy to report that the Minister of Agriculture from Guyana will be in Barbados next week, and I am hopeful that the President of Guyana will also open and be the feature speaker at our AgroFest Festival in May of this year when it returns. Mr. Speaker, it isn't only in the area of crops and food terminal that we're working. We have also agreed to collaborate on the export of Barbadian black-belly sheep and the expansion significantly of the numbers of sheep, both as a pure breed, but also as a hybrid with the sheep that they have in Guyana, such that we can have, within the next 5 years, a commitment to be able to have at least 1 million sheep within us. We believe that the carcasses can be shipped back to Barbados, and Barbadians, appropriately trained in butchering, can literally provide the cuts that are needed, and that will also allow us then to export and to use locally, and to ensure that we keep the Barbadian Blackbelly brand as the premium brand at the top of the chain, while still also dealing with the hybrid sheep that will also be available for normal purchase and lower prices. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Leroy McLean, who heads up this Blackbelly sheep project, well known to many of you and to me in particular, is in Guyana as we speak now, dealing with this matter, along with my special envoy, Althea Wiggins. Mr. Speaker, in addition, we are also discussing with Guyana putting in capital to have a regional green investment bank so that our companies that want to make the adjustment and the adaptation to the new climate crisis will be in a position so to do by having access to affordable capital. And we hope to be working with the Green Climate Fund. Indeed, on Wednesday of this week, we will host a mission on the UN Green Climate Fund to discuss this partnership. The Barbados and Guyanese private sectors also have had successful meetings, and as a follow-up, we will be going down, as I said, for the Regional Investment Conference in Agricultural Investment on May 19th. But similarly, they will also be bringing a tremendous amount of businessmen and enterprises here to participate in AgroFest, and also to ensure that there can be continued commitment. Let us not forget, Mr. Speaker, that Barbadians went to Guyana immediately after emancipation to teach them how to build the sugar industry. And Guyanese came to Barbados in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s to build out our manufacturing sector. So that this partnership is nothing new. Indeed, what is new is that we have opened up also to Suriname to be able to participate with us on many of these activities, and indeed Belize as well. Similarly, investment in Guyana on the road that links the Caribbean coast to northern Brazil and new investments in ports and ferries will immediately open up for the eastern and southern Caribbean markets that would not otherwise be available in northern Brazil. We look forward, therefore, to Barbados becoming a major regional hub for professional and financial services that will be needed to benefit, that will be needed coming out of those new areas of economic opportunity. Mr. Speaker, as you will recall, I hold the position as Prime Minister of Barbados for the lead position on CARICOM's single market and single economy, and our own Professor Avinash Prasad chaired the CARICOM Commission on Economy. Fearful of this being just another worthy report, the commission, which included the current head of the World Trade Organization, Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, produced a very practical set of initiatives, half of which have already been adopted. The elimination of roaming charges was one of the Commission's recommendations. Another one was the proposal for enhanced cooperation, which we just agreed as heads of government, where 2 or 3 or 4 of us, numbers of us are gathered, we can move forward without waiting for unanimity. And indeed, Mr. Speaker, this agreement, we believe, will unlock further activity within the Caribbean community at the very time that we need it most as we fight the challenges in this world. So, how do we share the burden and share the benefit, Mr. Speaker? On a broad definition, tourism represents approximately 40% of our economy when considering total income, expenditure, and employment. By February of 2020, we know the pandemic had taken hold. We know we dropped to virtually zero arrivals. We know what I said about the workers who had to draw, the 32,000 workers who had to draw from the Unemployment Benefit Fund. And more often than not, we saw exactly what we expected to happen, that the private sector retreated to protect itself, and that the government had to expand its girth in order to hold the space that effectively became vacant in the economic life of this country. This is not unusual, and it has happened and occurred during other crises across the world. If indeed we had not stepped up to build the hospital and to make nurses, medicine, and equipment available, if we had not provided healthcare leadership, if we had not intervened to enable additional cash transfers and new benefits and support employment and these other things, our peace and stability would have been gravely threatened. One of the reasons why our 12-month welcome stamp was so successful, we almost forget about it, was that unwittingly, we provided a place of peace and security for citizens and visitors alike in a scary and disorderly world. And we should never forget the proud achievement that that put on us. Long peace and stability of our country may have made us complacent about it, and we take it for granted. But others in less fortunate places recognized how important this was for them. Indeed, many of our visitors lamented the chaos and breakdown of order in places like New York, to Ottawa, and Prague, to Vienna. At one extreme case, according to the data compiled by the University of Central Florida and the University of Kentucky, 2021 was a record year equally for successful coups in the world. The United Nations Secretary General, in fact, described it as an epidemic of coups. Peace is precious, sir, but it does not come cheap. COVID cost us, as I said, just about under $1 billion. We know what we had to put into the NIS in terms of $150 million. In the middle of this investment in health and jobs, voices could be heard griping that we were piling up too much debt. Don't mind I told you that not a single country in the world got through this without debt. Never mind that the debt was concessionary and at low interest rates, 1%, 2%, and 4%, not 11, 12, and 14%. The implication was that this was not a time for investing, but they wanted us to cut. But we chose to invest. But peace and calm are also, Mr. Speaker, the dividend of lengthy and expensive investments in public health, education, law and order, and indeed, we have had an unfaltering commitment to making these investments as an independent nation. And it showed and it paid a reward. 2 weeks ago, the University of the West Indies reported a record number of graduates in 2021. Lest we forget, one of the achievements in an IMF program was the restoration of free tertiary education in this country. And even as it is hard, we continue to guarantee that at the levels at which we have, even if we have to pace the level of expansion until we see where our economy is going. Mr. Speaker, that is a measure of the calm and order, of a sense of accountability for the future that this government believes that we can build for our people. When historians look back on these times, I am confident that they will include and conclude that leadership, and I don't mean leadership by me, I mean leadership across this entire society, leadership of the social partnership, leadership of the institutions. It is leadership for the most part at the level of the churches, at the level of every sphere of the third sector and the private sector, of the labor movement, for the most part, would have brought us thus far, safely thus far. And the impact, I say to you, would have been devastating otherwise if we did not have that public support and leadership. But, Mr. Speaker, there was a part of the economy that was relatively unscathed. And that part of the economy, particularly in the telecom sector, the insurance and finance sectors, recorded higher net incomes in 2020 and 2021 than they did in 2019 in many instances, while their overall corporate tax revenues fell by 33%. Because, Mr. Speaker, remember, we reduced corporation taxes in this country from 25% downwards, starting at 5.5% and going to 1%. And while we are cognizant of the attempts for a global minimum tax rate of 15%, we are still very much in those discussions, and therefore our tax rates remain as they are. But today, as we erect a shield to protect Barbadians, as we invest in fiscal space to preserve our resilience to the next shock, as we responsibly scale back the enormous efforts to hold this economy and this society together in 2020 and 2021, we ask those sectors that remain largely unscathed in 2020 and 2021 to make a one-off contribution to the Herculean efforts expended to hold our society together during the 2 years of the COVID pandemic. Mr. Speaker, Those sectors benefited from that public support indirectly and sometimes directly, while they also benefited from COVID not impacting their businesses to the point where the very foundation of their businesses would have been destroyed. An improperly or badly led country would have had those consequences for some companies. People in Barbados still needed to pay the insurance premium. They paid their loan payments, even though in some instances there was limited moratoria, but the numbers don't lie. They still drove to buy what they had to buy, and they relied upon their cell phones and indeed on the internet even more than they did before COVID. So, Mr. Speaker, we shall introduce a one-off pandemic contribution levy on corporate profits in certain sectors. Where a company with a net income above $5 million in 2020 and 2021 is carrying on domestic business in the telecommunications sector, in the retail sale of petroleum products by dealers, in the commercial banking sector, so deposit taking and finance houses are there, but we exclude credit unions, and in general and life insurance business, then these companies shall be subject to a pandemic contribution levy of 15% of their net income per the company's financial statements for the fiscal years ending March 2021 and 2022. Mr. Speaker, this levy for each fiscal year is payable in addition to the company's corporation tax obligation, and it is not deductible for tax purposes. The pandemic contribution levy for the 2 fiscal years is payable to the Barbados Revenue Authority in 8 monthly payments commencing July 15th of this year, 2022. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, the levy in respect of the fiscal year ended 2021 is due in the July to October 2022 period, and the levy in respect of the fiscal year ended 2022 is due in the period November 2022 to February 2023. This levy will only be in place for the period up until March 2023 and represents, as I said, a one-off contribution to the over $1 billion costs that it has cost us as a nation to fight COVID. Its people, we estimate, that this levy will raise approximately $105 million. $105 million, or approximately just over 10% of what it cost the government of Barbados to fight COVID. May I remind us as well that the levy is based on 15% of the net income, which means that 85% of their profits effectively remain with them, and the government is seeking to tap in, as a modest contribution, 15%. In addition to that, Mr. Speaker, we shall also introduce a one-off pandemic contribution levy on income with effect from the 1st of April 2022, where an individual receives an income of more than $6,250 per month or $75,000 per year, the individual shall contribute 1% of his monthly earnings as a pandemic contribution levy on his income for only 12 months. This levy is payable in addition to the individual's income tax obligations and is not deductible for tax purposes. So by way of example, sir, if you are earning $6,250 a month, you will pay $62.50 each month for 12 months. If you are earning $8,000 a month, you will pay $80 a month for 12 months. If you are earning $12,000 a month, you will pay $120 a month for 12 months. And Mr. Speaker, you will note that we have decided to continue to shield all persons earning below $6,250 a month, because we know that it must be proportionate to what people can bear. There are those who will say that a person earning $5,000 earning a lot, but we have to remember that in this society, that person earning $4,000 or $5,000 invariably are carrying others who would not otherwise be able to carry themselves. We estimate that this levy will raise just about $15 million over the course of the 12 months. Mr. Speaker, I know, no one enjoys paying taxes, even when they are one-off taxes. But we have come through the night by sharing the burden and sharing the benefits. This nation, therefore, thanks those who will now step up the plate and contribute, because we must do this together as one, and we share the burden, we share the benefit. Mr. Speaker, my government recognizes that we cannot reap what we have not sowed. And I shall set out, therefore, new long-term investments that the government will make to deliver fair and equitable growth. But as we recover and grow, now is also the time to fix some long-term challenges that past governments have regrettably kicked down the road. You know it is not in me to add to the problem of just pointlessly kicking down a can, and for what it's worth, we shall face it and fix it. Let me turn to these issues first. There are some perennial challenges facing our generation. One of them has been stabilizing our public sector pension scheme and financing the total upgrade of our water supply and distribution system. A third growing issue is the production, sale, and distribution of natural gas, and obviously there's also the reform of the state-owned enterprises. Mr. Speaker, as it relates to pension reform, let me first provide background to the issue facing us, which is wider than just its impact on pensions. One of the critical challenges we face, as you've heard me say, is the population size and the demographic trends of our nation. We have not replaced our population since 1980, which is one of the critical finds by the Population Commission set up during the first term of this government. Our workforce will be smaller in 12 to 13 years' time than it is today. Our classrooms are already smaller, and you only need to check with the Minister of Education, the new member for St. Philip West, to be able to determine the kinds of numbers, and the member for St. Michael Southeast would tell her that those numbers have been continuously declining. This is a major concern because our social and economic systems rely on a contributing workforce and a growing economy. Managing the careful expansion of our population is therefore one part of a comprehensive long-term plan to manage pension provision across this country, and it will also be one of our growth initiatives that I will refer to later. Another part of that comprehensive plan is recognition that a comfortable retirement is not just about a pension, but about health care and the general wellness of the individual. We are committed to a public health care system, and so as our population ages, we must consider in a systematic way how we encourage our citizens to pursue active and healthier lifestyles so that they can approach their golden years with good mental and physical health. Sir, nutrition security and using the tax system to support healthier eating is essential to ensure that an aging population is not associated with ill health and an epidemic of non-communicable diseases. Our national pension system, which most in the private sector rely upon, is based upon the national insurance system. When fiscal management of the last government meant that no one wanted to lend voluntarily to the government, except at onerous interest rates, the then government increasingly relied on forcing the NIS to accept their bonds. And so when the national debt was restructured, the NIS took a hit. It took a hit again with COVID, with over 40% of its members having to draw on the unemployment fund and then others on the severance payments fund, as we know. It also took a hit from there not being many alternative attractive investments for them locally. Part of our comprehensive plan, sir, towards pensions then is as follows. 1, make the NIS a statutory corporation and more independent from government in its operation by the end of this year, 2022. And the Minister for Labour and NIS knows that that is his remit. Recapitalize the national insurance scheme, which the Ministry of Finance is committed to doing. Require it to diversify its investments not only at home, but also abroad, because if you put all your eggs in one basket, we all know what happens to them. And 4, ensure that where private projects seek public support, they give the NIS a chance to invest appropriately and prudentially and reasonably. That is our side of the bargain. But there's another side, Mr. Speaker, that we need the people of Barbados to contribute. COVID should have taught everyone the importance of the NIS. It is one of the cornerstones of our economic system, And I do not know of any other system in our region that paid out the equivalent of 150 million Barbados dollars or 75 million US in the last 12 months. I take this opportunity, and I say so sincerely, sir, to encourage all Barbadians, including the self-employed, whether you are a coconut vendor, hairdresser, esthetician, designer, artist, musician, mason, carpenter, engineer, doctor, fisherman, lawyer, truck driver, plumber, real estate agent. Whatever you do, get yourself straight, I beg you please, with the NIS, because you're not doing it for us, you're doing it for yourself. It is a lifeline, Mr. Speaker, with contributions starting as little as $12 a week. Mr. Speaker, I ask Bajans to get on board. To all employees, I'm talking to you now, do not take it for granted that your employer will take care of your retirement planning. You too have a responsibility to go and check your account, which is now easily accessible online, available on the NIS portal at www.nis.gov.bb. Please go and check. And to all employers, I say to you that we know that COVID has significantly impacted your business in the last 2 years. But as we reopen this economy, we need you to settle with the NIS any outstanding contributions for your employees. And believe you me, whether it is at BRA or at NIS, this government has an open approach. Accordingly, I am therefore announcing that there will be a moratorium on interest of any outstanding contributions to the NIS effective April 1st, 2022 to the 30th of June, 2022, once you settle your principal contributions within a 2-year period. So you go. Sorry, I was told that the figure is $21 per week, not $12 a week. So I'm sorry if I misled the House. The bottom line is, Mr. Speaker, that we are making it possible for people to go and settle their arrears. We'll waive the interest, but enter a payment plan that you'll settle what you owe in principal over a 2-year period. They will bring you back up, because anybody who's a lawyer will tell you that under the law of compromise, if you breach your part of the bargain, as the Attorney General will tell you, then you owe the original amount that was waived initially. Mr. Speaker, you are well aware of the law of compromise too. And those are the same arrangements that we put in place for the Revenue Authority too. And why? Because we understood, Mr. Speaker, that in many instances people could not get credit from the banks and cannot easily get credit from the banks to settle these outstanding liabilities. So that the government through NIS, through Barbados Revenue Authority, and the NIS on its own are both prepared to be that financial intermediary so long as you stick to the plan. If you don't stick to the plan now, the original debts become owing again. So, Mr. Speaker, affected businesses and self-employed persons should go and make use of this moratorium on interest. For the avoidance of doubt, any businesses and self-employed persons entering that arrangement to pay before March 31st, 2024 will then, as I said, qualify for the waiver. So the earlier businesses and self-employed persons enter into these arrangements, the better for you. If you don't settle a payment plan during the period of the amnesty, well, you will be required to pay all your interest, and you may well be the subject of enforcement. I now turn to the public sector pension scheme. For the avoidance of doubt, sir, I'm referring to pension arrangements only for those working for the government. I am only referring to pension arrangements for public servants. On assuming office in May 2018, the government found approximately $250 million in unpaid national insurance contributions for public servants for the period 2015 to 2018. $250 million was owed by the government of Barbados to the National Insurance Scheme for 2015 to 2018. I am extremely proud, sir, that in spite of the extraordinary and unprecedented economic pressure faced by this country in the last 3.5 years, that this government has managed not only to keep current with NIS contributions, but to repay those unpaid contributions that were literally built up by the last government to the National Insurance Scheme. Mr. Speaker, pension reform in the public service has been one of the cornerstones, the structural benchmarks that we set ourselves under the Barbados Economic Recovery and Transformation Program, otherwise known as the BERT program. An actuarial review was conducted and consultations were undertaken within the elements of the social partnership, and feedback from stakeholders was received. Mr. Speaker, the government of Barbados currently has both unfunded pension obligations and partially funded pension obligations. The operation of the unfunded pension arrangements are paid on a pay-as-you-go basis. Basically what this means, sir, is that pension benefits are paid to public officers out of tax revenues as they fall due. That's what puts so much pressure on us. Several statutory bodies whose benefits are payable under Chapters 25 or 384 of the laws of Barbados also pay their pension benefits as they fall due. The Transport Board's pension arrangement is set out in a union arrangement, and it operates its pension obligations on a pay-as-you-go basis, whilst the Barbados Defence Force pension scheme operates on a pay-as-you-go basis with a fund which consists of only employee contributions. Employer contributions. There are currently an estimated 20,653 public officers operating under the unfunded system, with annual salaries of just about $983 million and 11,431 retirees with total pensions of $239.4 million per year. Under the funded pension obligations, there are currently 9 statutory bodies that have pension plans and have pension assets set aside to meet their pension obligations. 3 entities have assets exceeding obligations or funded ratios over 100%. These are Barbados Tourism Investment Inc., Caves of Barbados, and the Central Bank of Barbados, just as we would like. By contrast, the Barbados Water Authority and the Caribbean Broadcasting Corporation have funding ratios of just 30% and 37%, respectively. These funds are chronically underfunded, and largely because of what has happened over the last 30 years, not anything that has happened in recent times. In the coming months, the Ministry of Finance will develop a plan of action to address the funding deficit to be reported to Parliament by the midterm review in October of this year. There are currently also an estimated 1,425 public officers operating under the funded system, with annual salaries of just over $88.2 million and 804 retirees with total pensions of around $14.9 million. Mr. Speaker, you may recall that all employees in this country, including every public officer, contributes to their pensions through the national insurance deductions on earnings up to $4,880 per month. Therefore, it must be clearly stated that the proposed pension reforms will not impact any public servant whose monthly salary is currently below the amount of $4,880 per month. Within central government, there are approximately 11,140 persons under the earnings ceiling for whom their pension is fully funded through their NIS contributions, whilst 4,121 persons earn above the threshold requiring funding from the Consolidated Fund to pay pensions above that threshold. NIS will administer all pensions, Mr. Speaker, arranged for the public sector as of the 1st of January 2024. We will also amend the pension arrangements to allow for the application of automatic abatement for public officers on early retirement. Mr. Speaker, I believe that that number should be January 1st, 2023, not 2024. Existing public officers whose salary is above the insurance earning ceiling will be exempt from making contributions to their pensions as their terms and conditions of service remain the same. However, officers who now are below the earning ceiling, who are promoted to or who go to acting posts for more than a month above the insurable earning ceiling, or an officer who enters the service for the first time above the ceiling will be required to make pension contributions. I want to repeat myself. Officers from below the earning ceiling who are promoted to or who are acting in posts for more than a month above the insurable earning ceiling, or an officer who is appointed for the first time in the service above that ceiling will be required to make pension contributions. In other words, sir, we are grandfathering those persons who are already earning above it, and we are requiring the new provisions only on those persons whose earnings rise above the threshold, but who have not yet come into that position where their earnings are above the threshold. Mr. Speaker, we all know the perennial issues with respect to people acting in posts for a long time and then reverting to substantive posts and the anxiety it provides with the calculation of pension benefits. There is a proposal before us to calculate pension on the basis of the best 5 years' salary, which would mitigate against the uncertainty that reverting to a below position will cause for public servants. This, Mr. Speaker, at the same time, would apply to all public officers who are making contributions to their pension, irrespective of whether they are below or above the earning ceiling. And, Mr. Speaker, this, at the same time as we regularize, we also seek to be fair with respect to people so that they get the benefit of the best 5 years rather than suffering because of the reversion to a low position. Similarly, Mr. Speaker, for all new employees to the public service, the maximum pension will be attained now after 40 years of service instead of 33 1/3 years of service, with contribution levels of between 2 and 3% below the NIS ceiling and 5 to 8% above. It is proposed that vesting for new employees be now at 3 years. Notwithstanding the above proposal, Mr. Speaker, and I've asked them for it because it's confused my head far less anybody else's head. I've asked that the government launch a comprehensive public education program for all public officers and indeed for the public at large, with a view to improving their financial knowledge in this regard and ultimately in encouraging all public officers to make voluntary contributions, not required, but voluntary as well, to their own pensions so that they may augment their pensions as they go into retirement. In addition, sir, I further propose to raise the insurance earnings ceiling to $1,182 per week or $5,120 per month, effective the 1st of January 2023. And the schedule of rates will also and have also been set out at the appendix hereinafter, Appendix F, I believe, to take effect from the 1st of January for each year until 2035. So we actually set out what those earnings will go up by year by year by year until the year 2035. Mr. Speaker, we could just kick the can down the road and close our eyes, as others have done. Close our eyes to the rising costs and the chronic underfunding of the system. I think that what we are doing is a fair and responsible way of putting a good and attractive public pension scheme on a strong and sustainable path. The current path is not sustainable, and we have a duty to protect those in it, just as we've had to do with those state-owned enterprises that were ignored for years. When cash flow problems came, people stopped paying in money to people's pensions. And as I said, this is over a 35-year period and nothing that is done recent. Even while we're doing this, sir, we need to nurture a culture where we commit to planning as Barbadians and taking responsibility, greater responsibility for our own future. Personal responsibility matters. Bajans must come to grips with planning for their retirement, even beyond what is available through the NIS or through government pension schemes. That is something we should do for ourselves. Investing in water, sir. Mr. Speaker, notwithstanding the negative impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on water consumption, the Barbados Water Authority is now covering its operational costs, a position it had only reached after the reforms we had insisted on implementing during our first term. In order to reliably deliver safe drinking water for all from a delivery system that was essentially laid more than 100 years ago, we talked about the burst mains earlier, sir, and the non-revenue water, we now have to put in place an ambitious capital works program. Currently, the Barbados Water Authority relies almost exclusively on government to fund this program, and certainly to provide government guarantees to the loans which it had undertaken in the last few years. Mr. Speaker, in the first year of COVID, 2020 to 21, we invested $26.7 million in Mains Lane for Highway 1, procuring the pipes and fittings for Highway 7, the Vineyard Water Augmentation Project that has delivered water to St. Joseph and St. Joseph and St. John. And Mr. Speaker, the mobilization of works for containerized desal plants at Colleton and Clinkets, the commencement of the St. Stephen's to Lodge Hill upgrade. You only need to pass on the highway and see the pipes being laid going down there. And indeed, emergency assistance with 3 new tanks at Fort George, Lodge Hill, and Boscobel. Mr. Speaker, the people can see where the money is going. During 2021 and 2022, the year that we're now finishing, the government has also contributed a further $27.3 million to assist with financing, the procuring of 32 water tanker trucks, the Mains Lane, the port transmission project, the purchase of 34 backup generators so that we can have them installed for times of power outage, particularly during a storm or a hurricane, the continued installation of the containerized desal plants at Colleton and Clinkets, and I believe the one we missed out earlier was the one at the Hope as well, for the desal plant. Mr. Speaker, now that the GSC levy has brought the financing of the BWA to the right level, we propose a new financing and governance model for executing and expanding the capital projects of the Water Authority in the future. The Water Authority collects approximately $2 million per month from the levy. We will also seek to use this amount to secure a new evergreen capital loan facility without a government guarantee, ensuring that the money is applied to both sewage and capital projects, and this will necessitate an amendment to the legislation. Mr. Speaker, we will begin initially with a cap of $50 million in that facility, but current plans suggest that with the levy and without a guarantee, we may well be able to secure a mix of financing, including commercial borrowing and concessionary development financing, that will enable us to comfortably service the $50 million of loans. The new facility will allow the Water Authority to bring forward a number of urgent investments and to prioritize them that would otherwise have to be sequenced over a number of years if they were to be financed only out of the consolidated fund. I refer, Mr. Speaker, and sit up, sir, because you will be happy when you hear the soaring of the Bell and Bellevue and its environs. You and the member for St. Michael East. 5 new concrete tanks, sir. A new containerized desal plant, as I just mentioned, at the Hope, which has now to be installed, having been procured. The temporary desal plant at Colleton, and the connection of mains from the Ionics to Shop Hill, as I said, the completion of that work with the Shop Hill, Ionics to Shop Hill upgrade. Mr. Speaker, the bringing forward of these capital works projects will not only bring relief to your people in the Bell and Bellevue, but it will also bring relief to the people of Boscobel, the people of St. Lucie, sir. And we know, Mr. Speaker, sir, it will bring additional economic activity and employment because people could not plan out their affairs without access to a ready and stable source of supply of water. National Petroleum Corporation, sir. Mr. Speaker, regrettably, the National Petroleum Corporation has incurred accumulated losses of $34 million over the period of 2016-2017 to 2021-22 this fiscal year. This is as a result of the Barbados National Oil Company, its parent BNOC, sourcing most of its natural gas from overseas at higher prices, a substantial reduction in BNOC's local low-price production, and a reduction in demand from tourism entities during the COVID period, because if the restaurants and the hotels are not open, they're not using the natural gas, they're not paying. Mr. Speaker, the NPC makes an operating loss of almost $700,000 a month on the sale of natural gas alone. Its operating expenses are almost $1.1 million, which when added to the losses on sales gives a total loss of $1.8 million per month. This is a substantial ongoing loss that requires a permanent fix. We propose 4 ways to remove this deficit. 1, we have reviewed the costs and contracts and will be reducing monthly operational expenses by about $200,000 per month. 2, we are working with BNOC to boost local production, and where it cannot do so, to source cheaper natural gas imports, but we are conscious also of the volatility of the moment in which we live now with the war, as I referred earlier. Thirdly, efforts are being made to reduce the natural gas leakage in the mains, which is regrettably currently around 15%, much lower than water, but 15% gas leakage is still too high for us to bear, especially given its flammable nature. This is not only costly, as we said, but this is an important source of greenhouse gases. These efforts will reduce the burden on consumers of fixing the deficit and will allow us, therefore, to keep domestic and residential rates constant at $1.70 per cubic meter of natural gas. There will be no increase of residential and domestic rates for natural gas. However, the hole is too large and too driven by an uncommercial price, and so we will need to raise the commercial rates modestly to eliminate at least a third of the deficit. From the 1st of April 2022, commercial customers will pay as follows: $2.28 for consumption up to 500 cubic meters, $2.24 for consumption from 501 cubic meters to 2,500, $2.22 for 2,501 to 10,000 cubic meters, and $2.20 for consumption over 10,000 cubic meters. For domestic customers, the rental fee of meters will increase from $5 to $10 per month. And for commercial customers, the fee will increase from $15 to $25 per month. Mr. Speaker, these measures will ensure that the National Petroleum Corporation is put on a sustainable path and that there is continued investment and production in cheap local natural gas. Mr. Speaker, all of our country's problems cannot be solved today in one speech, and I will be coming back to this issue of natural gas and clean bridge fuels and all of those, partially in this speech, but separately in conversations with the country, because it is important that the country also understands that net zero in 2050 does not mean fossil fuel free, because the International Energy Agency still expects that fossil fuels will be responsible for about 20% of the energy delivered in the world. But that is a conversation for another time. Reform of state-owned enterprises. Mr. Speaker, on coming to office in 2018, the government started an aggressive agenda to reform the operations of SOEs, to reduce risk exposure to government. If the truth be told, that is where most Caribbean countries have gotten themselves into fiscal difficulties: runaway expenditure in state-owned enterprises. You will recall, sir, that our citizens participated in a survey to identify what is essential, what is highly desirable, what is optional, and we added a fourth category: what is optional but could be delivered elsewhere. The participation of 5,000 Barbadians, 2% of our adult population, was a phenomenal response that other countries would love to have. We then embarked, sir, on the reforms of Phase 1 and Phase 2. As we were about to deal with Phase 3 reforms, boops, up comes COVID and puts everything on pause. We had to pause. It felt like books and truth. Had to pause the reform agenda. You're going to laugh, if not, you're going to go crazy. The pandemic threatened some of the very reforms implemented to transform our state-owned enterprises. For example, sir, no one could foresee the total cessation of international commercial flights, which meant that having taken the BTMI, Barbados Tourism Marketing Inc., off budget in October 2018 with the introduction of the Airline Travel and Tourism Development Tax, the government would have to provide budgetary support once again for BTMI for those 2 years. We are grateful and hopeful that with the return of travelers, that they will return to the position of 2019. Even though we are not yet fully past the pandemic, sir, we also had to deal with a reform agenda that will assist the government at this stage, and we feel that as we are moving about again, that we are ready to undertake this reform agenda. The following state-owned enterprises will therefore be addressed during the course of this year going forward. Within agriculture, the Barbados Agricultural Management Company, the Barbados Agricultural Development and Marketing Corporation, and the Barbados Agricultural Credit Trust. These affairs need to be reviewed after 30 years of these institutional arrangements that now need to be put in proper context. And when we come to the sugar industry, I'll make that point separately, not today, but we are in the process of dealing with the sugar industry in terms of removing the level of subsidies that the Barbados government has provided over the course of almost 50 years. The National Housing Corporation, the Caribbean Broadcasting Corporation, the Urban Development Commission and the Rural Development Commission will also be the subject of review during the course of this year. The Transport Board will also be the subject of review and is intended, subject to discussions with the labour movement, to move into a mass transit authority to improve the delivery of transport services in our country. Mr. Speaker, when we fix things, they work. The last time I spoke in here in 2019, I almost get my neck cut on the bus fare increases. And what did it deliver for us? 49 spanking new electric buses that are the envy of the region, and more are coming. Mr. Speaker, when we ask you to pay, when we ask the Water Authority to charge and bring the commercial rates up to the 766 for commercial customers, you saw what you are getting with respect to resolution of the problems for St. John and St. Joseph, with the tanks that have been built in Boscobel and Fort George and Lodge Hill. See what you're getting with respect to the Sanitation Services Authority and the garbage and sewage contribution fee. We have seen the complete renewal of the trucks, in the Sanitation Services Authority, and we are now seeing a whole new program roll out with respect to the efficiency gains for the bins. The Queen Elizabeth Hospital must also transition to an independent trust, and I've spoken to the Minister about it. Those plans were put on pause because of the management of the pandemic once again, and the restructuring of its operations and capital needs must also be undertaken, as we will talk about shortly. And the public-private partnership for the divestment of the management of the Grantley Adams Airport, not the ownership of the airport or its assets, will be completed during the course of the next fiscal year, before March 31st, 2023. Mr. Speaker, we must safeguard the gains that we have made so far, but we cannot allow complacency to set in. We have come too far as a nation for us to drop the ball. We must continue the reform of these state-owned enterprises to ensure that Barbados can receive the highest benefits from the utilization of our assets in this nation. From top to bottom, I say, sir, yet again, leadership does matter. And we will hold the boards of directors responsible, and to that extent, the Minister of Labour has already undertaken the process of ensuring that corporate governance skills are imparted through training to all members of boards and continually reinforced in so doing, because we cannot take it for granted that people have those skills when being appointed to boards. Mr. Speaker, let me come to the issue now of growth in this economy. I want to turn now, sir, to the measures to support inclusive and equitable growth. You know, there was once a time when people talked about jobless growth. Well, this government doesn't subscribe to jobless growth. We subscribe to inclusive and equitable growth. Those who are long in the tooth will know what I was referring to when I said that, because it will bring back memories of the early 1990s. I want to address, sir, an issue that is often relegated to being a long-term issue, but is also pressing and significant, and that is the population deficit to which I referred earlier under pension reform. Our Population Commission, led by the eminent Dr. Roberta Clark, concluded, as I said, that our workforce will be smaller in 12 to 13 years' time than it is today. This is a major concern because our social and economic systems, as well as our economic growth, rely on a contributing workforce. How many people come to work to produce goods and services each and every day? And indeed, if we allow this situation to continue, not only are pensions at risk, but the economic stability and the national security of this country will be placed at risk. Mr. Speaker, a substantial part of our workforce also must be kept here by keeping our young people wanting to remain in Barbados and working in Barbados to build out their country. If we want to have state-of-the-art medical and training facilities, if we want entrepreneurs to invest in new green and digital technologies and new financing and insurance products, if we are competing for international goods and shipping and airlift, we have to make sure that we remain resolute in fixing these population issues. One of the intangible reasons why Barbados has had the most successful 12-month welcome stamp is the degree of sophistication, depth, and diversity of our society. We will lose that if our population ages and all of a sudden we don't have enough young people to be able to support the system or to produce to keep us stable as a nation. We therefore, Mr. Speaker, will give much priority to how we increase our population and by how much. I expect that the Minister of Home Affairs will bring before this Honourable House a bill to review also our immigration policy, and that bill will also be the subject of review by the standing committees of Parliament so that we'll have the broadest possible national consultation. There are, however, 7 other medium-term transformations that must also drive growth in the medium term. So yes, we must deal with the population deficit, but let us now deal with these other 7. The green transition, especially in the areas of energy, transport, and agriculture. A housing revolution, I call it the silent housing revolution. A training revolution. 4, facilitating access to capital and facilities for small business and vending. 5, providing for food and nutritional security. 6, the digital revolution, which is upon us. And 7, stimulating the orange economy, which deals with the creative skills of so many of our people across this society. Before I get there, Mr. Speaker, let me give you a word on tourism. In the past, economic strategies were based around a few fashionable sectors that later grew out of fashion. Instead, our strategy today is people-centric and based around the transformations such as the greening transformation, conservation, digitizing, financing, community linkages, and the upskilling or training, as I just referred to, that cuts across all sectors. The best example, as we said earlier, of this is in the tourism sector, which has embraced all of these transformations as a part of the BEST program that was designed to help us through COVID. In that program, the financing was easy for greening, expansion, digitization, and training transformations. And the records will show that 50 tourism firms, along with supporting the employment of 2,142 tourism workers, benefited from the BEST program. Without that program, those firms and those workers would not be in a position today where they could raise their heads. Mr. Speaker, sir, now that visitors are returning and the BEST program has largely fulfilled its purpose, the ministry and industry bodies are looking for ways in which they can maintain and accelerate the momentum achieved in those areas of transformation. I have asked and will be asking the Minister of Tourism to work with the Barbados Hotel and Tourism Association and the Intimate Hotels of Barbados to ensure that our product can be as competitive as possible by having an approach that continues the expansion in those cross-cutting themes of greening, digitization, training, and access to capital. We're also in discussions on how best we can facilitate repayment of BEST funds on favorable terms where firms are continuing these investments on their own and no longer want to remain a part of the BEST program. Our best chance is really for them to come out of it, because their coming out of it means that they're capable of standing on their own 2 feet again. Let me address, sir, the first of then the cross-cutting strategies, the green transition, energy security, and enfranchisement. And Mr. Speaker, let me say that this excites me the most, perhaps, of all the things in this budget. I genuinely confess to that. Our electricity sector in Barbados is fundamental to our economy as it powers every facet of our life. In 2019, we made a policy decision that renewable energy from domestic resources such as sun, wind, bioenergy would be the new feedstock on which our electricity would be produced going forward in this country. This meant that Barbadians would no longer be in a position of having to consume foreign exchange to buy fuel, as was the case when our expenditure reached a high of $800 million in 2012. We are conscious that the conditions under which we live today may well present those scenarios again. The green energy transition is therefore a fundamental pillar of our growth strategy over the medium term, and a strategy that seems even more relevant today for the reasons that we just talked about when oil prices have doubled in the last 12 months. My government has been extremely proactive in this area, sir. In 2019, a clean energy bridge was commissioned by the Barbados Light and Power. After consultations with the government, I believe that the member for Christchurch East was then the minister responsible for securing that transition for us. I'm happy to report to this honourable chamber that the Barbados Light and Power has now constructed in St. Lucie at a cost of 130 million Barbados dollars, a solution to both the immediate need for new generation capacity on the island and the need for an efficient transition platform as the grid is increasingly driven by renewable energy technologies. The foresight of this step, sir, will be seen when that new clean energy bridge is pressed into service early next month in April of this year. At current international oil prices, this clean energy bridge is expected to save Barbados approximately 60 million Barbados dollars annually in imported fuel. And as the renewable energy investment grows, we believe that it will provide the necessary backup for grid resiliency and reliability. Sir, the clean energy bridge will be expected to reduce annual fuel consumption of heavy fuel oil by 1,900 tons and diesel by 1,000 tons per year, thereby contributing to further greening of the Barbadian environment and achieving our contribution, going towards our contribution to international decarbonization. Most importantly, it will also allow for conversion to natural gas as our clean energy bridge after 2030. May I say, Mr. Speaker, that I will address separately with the Minister of Energy on a different occasion our plans with respect to Barbados' offshore energy sector. I do not propose to do so today. My government, however, will continue to transition Barbados to a renewable energy island onshore that allows its people to participate and to access the resources of this country in order to drive economic growth in a real and significant way. The use of local content in the energy sector is an indispensable part of this sector. And that is why I've asked CARICOM to ensure that there is a working group to review issues pertaining to local content such that we do not all come into conflict with any parts of the rules that govern our community. Local content allows us to retain savings that are achieved from renewable energy and to redeploy them within our economy in a more productive way. Across the scale of energy generation, local content can also have a real and significant lasting positive impact by providing material socioeconomic benefits such as jobs, supply chain opportunities, associated business development opportunities, and direct revenue streams. Against this backdrop, sir, the government of Barbados will work with the Barbados Light and Power to develop a minimum of 30 megawatts of wind energy investment in Lambert, St. Lucie. We will establish financial instruments to make it possible for Barbadians from all walks of life to participate in and to own a minimum of 30% share in the benefits of that 30 megawatt onshore wind project at Lambert's. Under my government, sir, Barbadians must never ever be reduced to being tenants in their own country, and therefore we will ensure that as a recurring theme of energy investment in this country that we will create opportunities for the Barbadian public to participate in all major energy investment projects. Let me put it another way too, sir. Given the reluctance, we set ourselves a target that we would have wanted 30% participation in every major investment. But we recognize that that many people are reluctant to invest with people that they don't know, especially if it is a private company. Public company, there are mechanisms for dealing with that. Private company, people get reluctant. So what we have done is to go back to the table and to effectively reserve what is just shy of 60% of the market for Barbadian state-owned enterprises, Barbadian individuals, Barbadian companies, not for them to use exclusively on their own, but for them to use as the anchor for partnership with investments with others as Barbadian companies, state-owned enterprises, or individuals see fit. And how will this work? We anticipate, sir, that there will be opportunities in that 60%, for example, for the same onshore wind project that I just referred to. The green energy part that will see the Sanitation Service Authority remove its reliance on government for subventions will also be part of that 60%. The offshore wind farms, for which we now have feasibility reports that read well for their viability for 2 offshore wind projects at least, that will be part of the 60%. And the other projects that the Barbados Water Authority, the Transport Board, the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, the third sector, and the amount that we will reserve for the University of the West Indies and CARICOM projects, 5%, to be able to cover towards regional projects for which we have an obligation. To be more precise, sir, therefore, we will take the original 40% of the market we had. When we take 30% of the remaining 60%, it equated to 18%. And that is why I say we will isolate for Barbadian enterprises, Barbadian individuals, Barbadian companies, the equivalent of about 60% of the market. This will allow us to move with expedition in dealing with the other foreign interests that want to invest in the country, and they will come out of that 40% of the renewable energy market. Mr. Speaker, this is potentially a huge game changer in the development of this nation, if addressed correctly. And what we will not do as a government is only let those who are flush with capital, whether from outside or from within, to go to the top of the line such that they use up all of the energy and then the rest of the country be left outside looking in. The patrimony of the country is what? The wind, the sea, the sun is the patrimony of our country. And my government has thought long and hard about this, because whatever we do, we must not exclude Barbadians from the opportunity of sharing in the benefit of renewable energy as a game changer. Renewable energy, sir, offers us the opportunity to stabilize the fiscal conditions of many of our state-owned enterprises. You heard me talk about the Water Authority just now, or the hospital, or the Transport Board. You heard me, sir, talk about the third sector, charities for whom access to charitable donations is now very, very difficult. You heard me talk about our regional obligations like UWI. Our ability to remove our subventions to the sugar industry will come from ensuring that the power factory, that a sugar factory will run 12 months as a power factory instead of running 3 months a year as a power factory. And Mr. Speaker, we already know about the HOPE program, home ownership providing energy, allowing people who would not otherwise be able to qualify for mortgages in this country to be able to own a house by reason of being able to monetize the money from the roof. This is what we were elected to do, to make Barbadians owners of all that they survey in this nation. Mr. Speaker, I tell you that I get goose pimples when I think about what we're doing in this area, because I really do believe that it is a game changer. During the course of the last year and a half, the Energy Division has conducted detailed wind studies, as I've said, and we know that the opportunities for offshore investment is there, and we will work with selected countries across the globe, as well as with the IFC, in order to be able to materialize that benefit for all Barbadians. The opportunity also exists, Mr. Speaker, for us to ensure that the investment in those farms is not only limited to those international or regional partners, but that there will be a collective investment vehicle through which Barbadians can invest as well, both in terms of equity and in terms of debt as necessary. I'm going to come to why it makes sense in a minute, sir. Mr. Speaker, for us so to do. The fact that this country faces a challenge will be whether there is sufficient savings to be able to populate the scale of investments that lie before us as a nation with respect to the renewable energy sector, sir. And I'm pulling a document because what we are also announcing today, sir, is that in the manifesto, we spoke about the fact that we would make available opportunities for Barbadian homes. Whether it is in the collective investment vehicles to participate in the offshore wind farms, the onshore wind farm, or the green energy park, which is entitled, as I said, is designed 30 megawatts to bring the benefits not just through PV but also biowaste then. Whatever it is, we are determined, Mr. Speaker, to be able to create those opportunities for Barbadian investment. But it goes further. Battery storage technologies are essential to the process of accelerating the replacement of fossil fuel with renewable energy. Battery energy storage systems are devices that enable the energy from renewables like solar and wind to be stored and then released and dispatched when customers need the power most of all, and to where they need the power most. These technologies are therefore indispensable to ensure the powering of our homes and businesses, even when we have cloudy and overcast days as we've had much recently. And Mr. Speaker, they will even help during ashfalls, should we ever have an ashfall in the near future again, which we hope not to. The ability to capture renewable energy and to purposefully deploy it is therefore a major component of the requirements of a modern grid. As you know, sir, my government, as I said, has already signaled the intention to have at least 50,000 small homes and then to have another 10,000 new homes be the beneficiaries of renewable energy. But we'll go further today, sir. We are not limiting ourselves to the 50,000 homes, or we are not limiting ourselves to the 10,000 new houses that are to be built. We want to go further and today give every Barbadian residential household the right to own and install on their roofs a PV system. Everyone that can take it shall be entitled to it as of right. And this will be determined by the size of the square footage of the house, whether you get 2.5 kilowatts, 5 kilowatts, or 10 kilowatts. And if you want a number that varies to what your entitlement is, that is when you apply to the ministry for the variation. Mr. Speaker, householders will be given the specific conditions under which they can own and install the panels, rather than having to go through a process of application to the Ministry of Energy before being able to put it on their roofs. In other words, Mr. Speaker, we are not going through the laborious thing of having 80,000 applications from 80,000 householders to put 80,000 PV panels on roofs in this country. Barbadian owners of households will be entitled as of right to place it on. The only constraint, Mr. Speaker, will be, and I'll come to that, the extent to which the Light and Power needs to order how it goes on and how it is gathered. And that is why battery storage is so critical to being able to make this promise of enfranchisement a reality for every Barbadian household. So, Mr. Speaker, in the same way that Barbadians came to enjoy free education as of right, in the same way that Barbadians came to enjoy, Mr. Speaker, those who lived on tenantry lands, the right to buy the tenantry lands at 10 cents a square foot or $2.50 a square foot as of right. Mr. Speaker, the Parliament of 2022 today confers on every Barbadian-owned household the right to own a PV panel on their roofs, or indeed a small wind turbine on their roofs, to be able to generate a 2.5 kilowatt, 5 kilowatt, or 10 kilowatt as necessary. Mr. Speaker, we rise and fall with the people of this nation as we bring this new renewable energy productive sector to the nation. And I look forward to the work of the Honourable Member for St. James Central and the Honourable Member for Christchurch West, making sure that this becomes a lived reality for every Barbadian household. And Mr. Speaker, for those who do not have homes to put the panel on or the small wind turbine on, the collective investment vehicles, fancy word for the fact that you're going to put money in a unit trust or some kind of, almost like how a susu is. You put money in. But the difference is, when you put that money in the bank, you are attracting 0.05%. When you put it in debt in the renewable energy market, we expect it to you to get anywhere between 3 to 5% back on the money you invest. And if you want to be a little more daring, instead of going for debt, which must be paid first, and you want to go for equity to help own the thing, then you will get a higher return, but you're paid after debt is paid. And that higher return we expect to be in the vicinity of between 8 to 12% as a rate of return on the money. Mr. Speaker, let me give you some examples, please. And this is in the appendix of the document. It's just I don't want to move to it. If you invested $1,000, you know how much money you're going to get in interest in the bank in Barbados for that $1,000 after 10 years? $5.01. You know how much money you're going to get after 20 years? $10.05. If you took that same $1,000 and invested it in debt, in renewable energy, bonds, at 4%, for argument's sake, you will get $400 after 10 years and $800 after 20. But if you put it in equity, you will get $1,200 after 10 years and $2,400 after 20. If you had $10,000, you put it in the bank, after 10 years you get $50. After 20 you get $100. You take the same $10,000 and you put it in a bond for renewable energy. After 10 years, Mr. Speaker, you get $4,000. After 20 years, you get $8,000. After 1 year, you get $400. That's debt. And if you go and put it in equity, Mr. Speaker, after 10 years, you get $12,000. And after 20 years, you get $24,000. There got a few people out here that might want to invest $100,000. If they put it in the bank, I don't know who, I don't have it. If you put it in the bank, sir, you get $1,000 after, $1,004.76 after 20 years on $100,000. You get $501.13 after 10 years. You take that same $100,000, sir, and you put it in bonds. You get $40,000 after 10 years. And you get $80,000 after 20 years in bonds at 4%. You take that same money, sir, and you put it in equity. You let the people with the debt get paid first. It's a little riskier, but all of us know that electricity is electricity is electricity. It's safe. You get $120,000 after 10 years. And you get $240,000 after 20 years. And if you only kept it in there for 1 year and you sold on the instrument, you would make $12,000 on top of what you get for selling on the instrument. Mr. Speaker, the one constraint is how we work with the Barbados Light and Power to get the battery framework in place. And we've also agreed with them that we should seek to create joint investment opportunities for the government of Barbados, Barbadian enterprises, and Barbadian individuals in the battery storage facility as well. Because if we are to reach 2030 with the commitments we have given, then we are going to need to have the 200 megawatts of battery storage, which on current pricing is about an $800 million investment. And if we go on a 60-40 ratio of equity to debt, 60% equity, and split it between the Light and Power and Barbados government, Barbadian businesses, Barbadian individuals taking half of that 60%, 30% of 800 million. We need to raise 240 million in equity, and then we need to raise $320 million in bonds. But we don't need to do it all at once because the battery storage is deployed over the next few years. Mr. Speaker, these are the opportunities, and that is why I've asked the Minister of Commerce to to also ensure that at the same time as he secures the trust loan program at the bottom, that he also creates programs for educating for having financial literacy education programs, because this is too basic and even a shopkeeper can understand that 0.05% gives you no return. In fact, I was cursed in this country for saying that the banks effectively are playing a security guard relationship with your money, because you are ending up paying them when you finish paying the bank fees for keeping your money in the market. Make your money work for you by building out this country and building out opportunities for your children. Mr. Speaker, we will see the changes in the housing industry because of renewable energy. We will see the changes in agriculture because of renewable energy. We will see the changes in the prosperity of Barbadian families because of renewable energy. Mr. Speaker, I ask the citizens once again to come together and to literally let us make sure that we manage this process of transition successfully for ourselves and our people. Mr. Speaker, our goal is to accelerate this energy transformation, and I am comfortable and confident that we can do it together. Green in transport, sir. A critical component of the energy transition is accelerating the shift away from those things, as I said, that are fossil fuel. Our electric buses have been a success. We all know it. Not only are they air-conditioned, but they got Wi-Fi now too that our people can use while they're coming to school or work. Currently, public officers in Barbados, however, are allowed to borrow only $50,000 interest-free for car loans, which have predominantly been used to purchase diesel and gasoline-powered vehicles. As of the 1st of April 2022, Mr. Speaker, we propose to increase the loan limit for public officers to $100,000 interest-free only for the purposes of electric or hybrid vehicles. So if you want to buy an electric or hybrid vehicle as a public servant, you can borrow $100,000 interest-free in order to further incentivize the purchase of these vehicles. Similarly, the $50,000 limit remains for the purchase of diesel or gasoline-funded vehicles, but we will review this and phase it out in another few years, given our 2030 decarbonization of the transport sector commitment. Mr. Speaker, there are also some anomalies in the customs tariff which needs to be corrected. With respect to the import duty for used battery electric vehicles, the existing rate is 45%. This will revert to 10% on the 1st of April 2022, the same as a new battery electric vehicle and consistent with other types of vehicles. We will also reduce the tariff for fuel cell electric and solar-powered vehicles, new and used, from 45% to 10%. Import duty and the excise tax for new fuel cell electric vehicles will be reduced to 20%. The import duty for vehicles powered by liquefied petroleum gas and compressed natural gas will also be reduced to 25% from 45%, consistent with the designation of natural gas as a bridging fuel to renewable energy. This will be effective also on April 1st, 2022. A full list is outlined in the appendices. Mr. Speaker, there have also been a lot of calls for the customs duties on electrical vehicles to be reduced. The truth is, sir, in spite of the anomalies referenced earlier, the customs duties on electrical cars are already significantly lower than that on diesel or gasoline-fueled cars. The import duty on all diesel or gasoline-fueled cars, regardless of the engine size, is 45% compared to that of 10% for electric vehicles. The excise tax on diesel and gasoline-fueled cars range from 20% to 120%, compared to 20% for all electric vehicles. VAT is 17.5% on all duties, which means that the total customs duties, import duty, excise tax, and VAT for electric vehicles is at the figure of 47.5% of the value, compared to an 82.5% rate for a 1600 vehicle less than 1600 cc's, to a maximum of 182.5% for a vehicle that is greater to greater than or equivalent to 2,000 cc's. However, we want to do more to accelerate the creation of this green economy. We cannot only be talking the talk, we have also to walk the walk. The government is now prepared, therefore, to announce that an excise tax and VAT holiday will take place on the purchase of electric vehicles for 24 months, commencing the 1st of April 2022. This will further encourage Bajans to adopt and adapt to the rapidly changing environment. This means, sir, that Bajans will only pay the import duty of 10% for the next 2 years on the purchase of electric vehicles in this country. We hope, sir, that this will also encourage the private sector to accelerate the development of the charging network, which is so critical in order for us to be able to get there. Having said that, sir, the government is conscious as we mainstream electric vehicles and the green transport sector, this will lead to a substantial reduction in revenue from the road and fuel taxes that we currently get and that are needed to assist the member for St. Michael Southeast with her responsibilities now for road construction in this country and bridge construction, maintenance of roads. Recent road repairs and refurbishment have been substantial in Barbados. We have seen more roads paved in this country in the last 3.5 years than were paved for almost 15 years. To address this deficiency in revenue, sir, I propose to introduce now a new alternate fuel levy with a fixed and variable component for vehicles not powered by diesel or gasoline. The fixed portion of the alternate fuel levy, owners of these alternate powered vehicles will be required to pay the effectively $25 per month via direct debit or standing order on the 15th day of each month, or they can pay the $300 per year one time and done with it as the fixed portion of the alternate fuel levy. The variable portion, and we do it by month because we recognize that for some families, they still prefer to have the cash flow ease. The variable portion of the levy relates to annual mileage, which will be charged at the equivalent of 2 cents a kilometer above a 15,000 kilometer quota that we give everyone. By way of example, sir, if a vehicle registers 18,000 kilometers in the year during its insurance year, because we are going to work hopefully with the insurance companies to be able to literally monitor the mileage, then it is 2 cents applied not to 18,000 kilometers, but 2 cents applied to 3,000 kilometers because you get the first 15,000 free. That means then that if you multiply 3,000 by 2 cents, the owner then pays $60 as the variable component for the use of the roads for that 12-month period in this country. Mr. Speaker, we believe that when you add that $300 that they paid as the fixed amount to the $60 that they pay as the variable, that this is a very reasonable state of affairs. But more importantly, like the fuel tax, they also puts you in control of what you pay depending on how much you use your car or not. Personal responsibility. As I said, sir, we will work with the general insurance industry to find a seamless way to verify the odometer readings to be able to collect the variable component of the tariff. We are considering self-compliance using an online validation system with random checks. But let me tell you, if you get catch, the fine will be much heavier than the amount you would have paid had you just simply paid what you were supposed to pay. We will require all electric and other qualifying vehicles to be re-registered first under the new electronic vehicle registration system in May of this year in order for the levy to be introduced from the 1st of July 2022. Mr. Speaker, this modern measure brings greater equity to road users in relation to the future of taxation, while continuing to support the wide adoption of electric vehicles, energy transition, and the green economy. And whilst I'm on the subject of transport, sir, the pandemic has meant that car rental companies have had to downsize their fleet in order to survive the fallout from little or no tourist arrivals in the country. Now that tourism has started to rebound and demand is rising, we are conscious that cash flow is not quite still what it was back to pre-COVID-19 levels. However, we believe that with a strong forward booking and given the COVID posture in a number of our key source markets, we are confident that the ability to reflect and recover cash flow will be there. To aid in the process of refleeting to pre-pandemic levels, the government proposes to allow authorized operators of car rental companies to pay 50% of the license and permit fees upfront in order. The remaining 50% will be paid within 12 months of registration, given that vehicles are revenue generating for the companies. This measure will take effect from the 1st of April 2022 and will be available to the sector for 18 months. There's some amendments to be made in the written document. Please go to 2012. Okay. In addition, Mr. Speaker, I have not addressed the issue of the new deal for PSV operators or the new fares for taxis. I have asked the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Public Works and Transport to meet urgently and to continue the work that was started by the previous minister so that she can report to the country no later than the 30th of June 2022 a new deal for PSV operators and a new deal for taxis who have not had their fares increased in this country for more than 12 years. Housing and building resilience across communities. Mr. Speaker, it was a Barbados Labour Party government that provided the largest ever private sector housing boom in the history of this country. In our manifesto this year, we promised to create 10,000 housing solutions in the next 5 years. Some ask, can it be done? This year alone, dozens of homes by Hope Inc. are being completed at Lancaster St. James. In fact, the first 30 are expected to be handed over, I'm told, within the next few weeks. Similarly, nearly 100 of 275 are in various stages of completion at Chancery Lane in Christchurch. Dozens more are earmarked for Coverley. The NHC is constructing 20 new government housing units for rental at White Park in the city this year, and another set scheduled for Lower Burnie in the following financial year that's coming to assist in topping back up the NHC's depleting stock of rental units. In all, sir, we are projecting approximately 1,200 solutions in year one. This is, however, projected to be significantly doubled in year two, and the member for St. George South has been put on notice that that is what he will be measured by. Once the infrastructure is completed, we want to see the pace of houses going up, particularly with the HOPE program that will literally make it easier for persons once we start utilizing the rooftops to be able to help them have a separate source of income to be able to access mortgages. Sir, we are catering to all. And why? We intend to ensure that those earning below $2,000 can buy or rent to own if they want. Those between $2,000 to $4,000 can buy. Those between $4,000 to $8,000 can buy. And that is why we have the different levels of hope in order to be able to respond to the different market. How could we expect a police sergeant earning $2,700, $2,800 a month to buy land at $25 a square foot in this country and to build a house for him and his family, or for she and her family? A nurse earning $3,000 a month, same thing. A teacher. And that is why the government is putting so much attention and emphasis on this silent revolution in housing, because it is unacceptable for a country to accept that the waiting list at the National Housing Corporation can be in excess of 25,000 persons for over 30 years in this country. It must come to an end. And Mr. Speaker, I say that I would like to see 10,000 houses in 5 years, but anybody who knows me knows that that's my public commitment. I say nothing more. The member for St. George South will take warning and take heed. The government will continue to work with the local private sector along with regional and international partners from China and from Guyana to assist us in boosting our housing stock. there is more than enough work for everyone because we have a limited number of local providers and we need to also bring in others if we are going to clear this backlog in the next 5 years. Mr. Speaker, under one model, the large local contractors will be able to construct the houses and infrastructure where the government provides the land. Another model, government puts in the infrastructure and the small and medium-sized local contractors would then construct the house. In another model, first-time homeowners who can't afford a mortgage might be provided with basic, comfortable housing, but asked to pay no more than $400 or so towards the cost of the land, and then also in a rent-to-own program that will see it transition to them. But I hope, sir, that this government and the member for St. James Central will show Bajans how ownership is cheaper than rental, and that every Barbadian will want to own instead of renting, because as a student in university, I learned that rent is dead money. From the time it leaves your hand, it dead, Mr. Speaker. You pay the same amount of money in a mortgage, and it building up equity that you can go and borrow back on to buy a car, to buy, to help somebody in the education, to help build a house, to help do anything. But rent, from the time it leaves you, you have nothing left in that money that you have given away. So I hope Barbadians will understand, as their foreparents did, the importance of ownership of property in this country. Others who can afford the mortgage, like in the case of the Hope, will pay a smaller mortgage and will normally have to pay the bank because of the installation of solar photovoltaics on their roofs. So, Mr. Speaker, there will be tanta options, many options for whatever it is you want to do, we hope, in the housing market. I turn now, sir, to building resilience. Mr. Speaker, this government takes the climate crisis seriously, as you know. He who feels it, she who feels it, knows it. And we felt it last year, not just in the drought, but regrettably in the loss of houses from Elsa and the freak storm. Our response is both mitigation and adaptation. And indeed, we are hopeful that we can build stronger and more resilient houses within our community. These houses that are being built must be built to ensure that they are capable of withstanding the challenges that we have in terms of climate. Mr. Speaker, after Elsa, there were a number of critical responses that we needed. Our commitment to build back better and to build back stronger must therefore be absolute and unwavering. Barbadians have already seen the government's strong response to addressing not only the drainage issues, but also the improvement in the water infrastructure. There are parts of this country that were being flooded 3.5 years ago, and with the recent heavy rains, when they come, we have seen that the works that we have done to alleviate the drainage in those communities has in fact made a positive difference to life and livelihood and property. Mr. Speaker, the Water Authority will be engaging in an aggressive program to provide personal water tanks and pumps financed through various methods to a number of households. It will use grant funding provided by the Green Climate Fund for $14 million Barbados dollars to provide 1,500 tanks, as well as $5.6 million Barbados dollars for rainwater harvesting systems at homes, educational and health facilities, and community centers across our country. To ensure fair access for the vulnerable, a needs assessment consultancy was completed to determine the recipients based on criteria developed in collaboration with the Ministry of People Empowerment and Elder Affairs. Mr. Speaker, the pilot phase has started. The first installations have been prioritized for the northern parishes to address the current challenges with availability of supply and water quality. Private citizens who have the means to do so are encouraged to follow suit. These are funny times in which we live, sir. Secondly, sir, we're embarking on a strap-it program, strapping our houses, strapping the roofs of our houses down so that we can secure as many roofs as possible across the housing stock that may be vulnerable and susceptible. As we saw with the passage of Elsa and the freak storm, too many of our houses are exposed. In our effort, therefore, to build resilience against the vagaries of climate crisis, it is important also that we manage our storm water drainage systems, which consist of wells, inlets, gratings, and other infrastructure to ensure that flooding is minimized. Well digging and well cleaning is a dying art in this country, and government intends to enfranchise some of our young men and young women to develop businesses to address problems which we face in this country with respect to the cleaning of wells. Preliminary discussion has started with the TVET program to develop courses in the art of well cleaning and well digging. There are in excess of 4,000 stormwater wells in Barbados, and there are less than 20 active well contractors. Therefore, with training and the facility to assist young business persons in the enterprise of well cleaning and well digging, it is expected that the complement of well contractors should increase in Barbados within the next 2 years. Mr. Speaker, if there are any well contractors who are not currently subscribed in the program, please send your business information to the Ministry of Transport, Works and Water Resources. We need all of the help to put this country in good shape to fight off all of the problems that come from wells not being cleaned. Recent data from the Drainage Unit shows that between February 2020 and February 2022, even though we know we had the COVID pandemic, only 254 wells had been cleaned. So, Mr. Speaker, not only will the cleaning of our stormwater wells mitigate against flooding, it will reduce the amount of surface water going into the sea and therefore allow for the provision of replenishment of our aquifers. Independent emergency electricity generation. Another aspect of the Community Resilience Program, sir, relates to access to electricity post-disaster. As I said, we've set the targets earlier with respect to the ambitious target of being fossil fuel free by 2030. But we recognize that there are some lessons that we must learn. Last year, we got a taste of it after ELSA with access to electricity in the critical post-disaster period. I propose that effective April 1st, 2022, that there be a waiver of import duty and VAT for 2 years for the purchase and installation of generators at residential homes, irrespective of the fuel type to be used, to help build resilience across communities in this country. Mr. Speaker, given all that we are doing, we are not, and we recognize that with respect to land tax, we made commitments that we want to honor. We are not in a position to honor them in this financial year because of all that we are facing. But we are confident, Mr. Speaker, that we can honor it starting from the financial year starting April 1st, 2023. I therefore propose that from that day, the threshold for land tax on residential properties below which zero land tax is due will be increased from the current $175,000 to $300,000, and then on the 1st of April 2026, that $300,000 threshold will be raised to $400,000. To summarize it, sir, from 1st of April 2023, no land tax is due on any residential property with a value of less than $300,000, nor will you pay on the first $300,000 of land tax. And from the 1st of April 2026, no land tax will be due on any property valued at $400,000 or will you pay on the first $400,000. Creative and entrepreneurial activities for small business. Sir, small businesses, including self-employed creative professional firms, account for about 30 to 40% of our economy. Many are dynamic, fast-growing firms, or those are where the owners are content, sometimes with just where they are. But many face high hurdles and never take off. We need an inclusive recovery that embraces the small business sector. Small business embodies the entrepreneurial spirit of Barbadians, and they are more efficient at creating new jobs which are necessary to stimulate economic activity. The potential for niche market exports, whether to tourists or through sales, cannot be overstated. Mr. Speaker, the studies have been done suggesting that one of the main reasons in Barbados is a lack of finance. And in turn, one of the main reasons why small firms with strong order books cannot access finance to grow their business is because they cannot use their assets as collateral for a loan or even sell their non-fixed assets because there is uncertainty over whether the asset is being used as a collateral for another loan, where it is, who owns it, or all the details surrounding it. These three solutions are therefore require that we look, one, to establish a collateral registry, two, that the factoring programs that we have go beyond just simply factoring on government debts. And 3, the provision of micro-leasing, so that if you need a piece of equipment, instead of buying the full piece of equipment for you to put down, 80% of the time you lease the piece of equipment for the period of time that you know it, making sure that you have the money then to be able to afford it. Mr. Speaker, we believe that these 3 steps will go a significant way towards boosting opportunities for small businesses in this country. We would like to see the establishment of the collateral registry, the factoring across the board, not just in public debt, as I said, but on the micro-leasing agencies, and we will work with the Small Business Association, the lawyers, and all other related bodies to put the supportive legislation in place as a matter of urgency during 2022 to 2023 fiscal year. Sometimes, sir, the issue is not just finance, but access to markets. The new digital world collapses the distance between producers and consumers of digital products. We will therefore launch, as promised in the manifesto, Mr. Speaker, an initiative called myeconomy.org.bb, where we provide free or low-cost tools to help every Barbadian businessman develop, produce, and market digital content on the world's digital platforms. With respect, sir, to the innovation and growth market and the junior stock exchange, I've just been talking about equity in here and show you how much more returns you can get from equity if you're prepared to take a little risk. And a judicious blend of equity and debt investments gives people the level of protection usually that they would want. Mr. Speaker, the junior stock market has not taken off in Barbados. Talk facts, straight talk. In part, this was because the cost, the reporting, and the conditions over how much equity had to be offered remained too onerous in our view. The new digital technologies, however, provide new opportunities to try and get this right and to create markets where Barbadians can trade small or large ownership stakes in Barbadian businesses. We aim to work with the Barbados Stock Exchange and the Small Business Association to establish a vibrant, low-cost exchange with more competitive fees, reporting, and equity conditions. We are also prepared to offer, perhaps through others, technical assistance for firms to meet the conditions of listing on the junior stock exchange. And separately, we need to support the arrival of low-cost brokers who will help small investors trade these shares. Mr. Speaker, it amazes me. The Jamaican Stock Exchange is the best performing stock exchange in the world for at least 2 or 3 of the last 10 years. It is not beyond our capacity to get this right with the level of liquidity in our banking system, sir. As it relates to the export culture, sir, I've been in public life now 30 years, and I've heard people reinforce the need for us to develop a mantra that nobody owes us a living, and because of what we import, we have to use foreign currency to be able to buy it. As a result, we must become experts in the export business, and that must be the new mantra inculcated in all of our children if we do not want to revisit the deep, dark days of economic decline in this country or even stagnation. I am pleased, therefore, that the BIDC is rebranding itself as Export Barbados and will be moving quickly from being a glorified real estate agent as it is now to once again facilitating businesses in getting their products and services to the marketplace. And I don't say so invidiously, because the real estate is critical, as you shall currently see. But we need to do more than simply provide real estate to those involved in industry in our country. With a strong focus on design and innovation, and with innovative financing, we are confident that our enterprises can grow rapidly. Whether it is in the area of life sciences, the bioeconomy, fintech, or food science, we are confident that Barbados will witness an exciting path forward. We will also introduce legislation within the next 3 months to establish a free zone in our country as part of our export strategy for manufacturing and non-financial services. Firms that are only exporters and in a specific physical space will benefit from a dedicated branch of the different regulatory bodies in a single one-stop shop physical and digital place that will facilitate their competitiveness. This type of framework will complement the drive to establish Barbados also as a fintech hub and to build up more industrial estates to drive growth. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, I have discussed with the Ministry of Finance that we will make available to Export Barbados the provision of $25 million to seed a new industrial capital works program in industrial estates which have not been expanded in this country, regrettably, for decades. These are the types of initiatives that we believe will help transform our local economy. I am told that the one firm that tendered for consultancy on the biotech industry and life sciences industry is the same firm that engineered the transformation of those industries in Massachusetts, in Bahrain, and in Singapore. We look forward to working with them to create opportunities for the 6,000 Barbadians who have been graduates of science at Cave Hill campus in the last 5 years, and for whom there have been limited opportunities in this country to be able to work in the area of science. Mr. Speaker, the introduction of innovative ways to tap the talents of local designers and facilitating the access to making samples so that real orders can be fulfilled is also a cornerstone of our growth. Gone are the days of sponsoring trips to business expos and receiving orders which then cannot be fulfilled. Barbados has a strong design culture, and there our absolute focus is in putting the structures in place to focus on production in order to supply the markets consistently. Notwithstanding these efforts, sir, there is one vital piece of the prize puzzle that must now be put in place before the end of this year. We've been talking about it too long. I wish to inform the House that the Ministry of Agriculture is at an advanced stage in the drafting of the sanitary and phytosanitary legislation. The member for St. James Central has spoken about it in every political campaign since, I believe, 1999. Usually in Oystins Town, because it also affects fishermen being able to export to Europe. Mr. Speaker, this must now be put behind us, and then we must work not only with our local labs, but with CAFSA in Suriname to ensure that we have the requisite standards put in place to facilitate trade in food and fisheries, in particular at a time when the country needs it more than ever, locally and regionally, to be able so to do. I look forward, therefore, to the passage in the chamber. Mr. Speaker, I could never be happier than that the fact that the first bill going before the Parliament of Barbados after we became a parliamentary republic was the bill that decriminalized illegal vending in this country. You know, sir, it is the small things that may appear to others to be small. But when a person selling is humbugged and moved and then forced to go into the main guard and get charged and then to go to court just because they're trying to sell a little trala to put food on the children's table, it is wrong. And for me, it was particularly emotional because I know that this was a battle being fought from as far back as the time of my grandfather in the 1950s. That we have reached here now is only but one of the steps. There must be a deal for everyone. And we therefore want to promote a work environment that will allow the vendors also to be able to work in a safe manner. We want to therefore ensure that facilities will be constructed around the island in close proximity to the nation's highways, because we understand why they want access to the high volume of traffic. But there must also be a healthier environment for these transactions. And we must leave the places clean at the end of the business day if we are to make sure that these things are sustainable. The construction will therefore see the placement of a number of vending kiosks, storage and bathroom facilities over the course of the next 3 years, starting at Redmond's Village in St. Thomas, Fitz Village in St. James. I have no doubt that the minister took a special delight in choosing these areas. The area adjacent to the Dighton Griffith School in Christchurch, in Top Rock, Christchurch. I believe the member for Christchurch South will be happy, and Christchurch West Central will be happy for those. And similarly, those St. Michael North will be happy, and St. Thomas and myself will be happy for the ones in Warrens as we go forward, which are badly needed. The architectural designs, I'm told, as I fully expect for Redmond's Village, are already finished. If I may come to the rescue of the member for St. James Central, however, those designs go back to a previous cabinet in 2003 under the then Honourable Owen Seymour Arthur, the member for St. Peter. And to the extent that he is now benefiting from it is purely a coincidence and not a matter of design. Mr. Speaker, sir, we will be collaborating with strategic partners and stakeholders on a project which will see the construction also of approximately 50 kiosks in the city, also looking at Swan Street and the neighboring areas. And later on, you will hear me refer to other works that we will continue. Having done Fairchild Street, we didn't only go and do Golden Square. We went across the road and did Fairchild Street, which regrettably became a place synonymous with people telling you about the garbage at the corner of that opposite VOB and the rats coming out at 5 and 6 o'clock in the morning, and sometimes even later in the day. And we now have a provision that is almost completed. The butcher's block still has to go. The remaining units to the front are going there, and we are going literally to the river bus stand to finish that side. We go to Temple Yard, and we go equally to Passage Road for the kiosks that have been there selling fish for some time that need to be upgraded. Mr. Speaker, we believe that the kiosks, the ones in Swan Street, they were designed by the students of the SJPI, Samuel Jackman Prescott Institute, and the Barbados Community College, and they're part of a competition that the ministry held, and they will be constructed by a community construction firm with funding through the Barbados Credit Union League as we go forward. The other capital works project, as I said, Mr. Speaker, much depends on how we get the capital works projects done. There is no doubt that COVID put a lash in us. There is no doubt that COVID in particular put a lash in private sector investment and capital projects in this country. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, you have already seen a ramping up of increased activity, but we expect it to go even further. Government's ambitious program to build the 10,000 houses will mean that we will need more people to work in the construction sector. It is against that backdrop also that we also recognize that the Construction Gateway Training Program has to start in order to be able to create the opportunities for persons to get the skills to help us in the public and private sector capital works projects. Before the pandemic, sir, we were also seeking to respond to the increasing number of young people at risk in this country. Therefore, we will fast-track also the completion of the facilities to house and train participants in the Barbados Youth Advanced Corps, which, as you know, was originally designed to take 1,000 students a year for a 2-year program. We have also, as I said, completed outpatient clinics in St. Andrew and St. Joseph, and the Ministry of Health has now turned its eyes to one in St. Thomas, and in fact, the outpatient clinic in St. Thomas, as well as the Gordon Cummins District Hospital. The QEH Hospital will also undergo a 5-year capital expenditure program in order to be able to fund the replacement of critical pieces of equipment so that it too may remove the backlogs which the Minister has regrettably shared with the country. We also seek to expand the clinical services being offered at the QEH by looking to move some of the administrative offices and the laboratory services and other departments into a building opposite the QEH on the Enmore site that will free up space in the current QEH building to facilitate the expanded clinical services. Mr. Speaker, this capital expenditure and this construction work will start towards the end of the next fiscal year, 2022 to 2023, and will help hopefully carry us a significant way to the elimination of those procedures that are backlogged. As we speak, Mr. Speaker, the design works are in fact almost completed at a macro level for the new geriatric hospital, which will be located within the Botanical Gardens at Waterford. And we anticipate that construction will start before the end of the next fiscal year, which starts April 1st and ends March next year, and will therefore mean that we will finally be in a position to remove the persons in the geriatric hospital from the very difficult conditions under which they live there at Beckles Road. Every time there is a hurricane, the first thing the Ministry of Health or a storm does is to advise us whether we have to move the patients at the geriatric hospital or not. Mr. Speaker, I should have said before, and I regret, that I've also asked the Minister of Health to meet with the alternative care of the elderly programs in the same way that we've asked the Minister of Transport to review the rates for taxi drivers for them to be reviewed and to report back to this honorable chamber no later than the 30th of June for renewed rates for the alternative care of the elderly program. With respect to other capital projects, Mr. Speaker, we also recognize that the opportunity now for a number of private investments to start taking off again is upon us. The government itself has an interest in ensuring the development of a new hotel at the Holborn site, which is the government procurement department site, which quite frankly can be facilitated elsewhere, while allowing us to maximize the use of that site on the water and obliquely opposite Kensington Oval to be able to attract tourists and persons interested in both water sports and cricket. And we hope to have conversations with those involved in the cricketing industry, locally and elsewhere, to get this going. We anticipate that the hotel at Sam Lord's, which was started by the Chinese, will also be completed within the next calendar year. And indeed, Mr. Speaker, we understand that the Hyatt Hotel project is closing in on financial close, and with a commitment as part of the regulatory approvals that ordinary Bajans will be able to invest in a percentage of that hotel is what we have been working towards, rather than simply consolidating wealth there. The Marriott Group met with me last week, and they're about to start a $150 million investment program in Barbados to bring up to speed all of the hotels that they bought from the Elegant Hotels Group. In addition, Mr. Speaker, there are a number of various hotels and mixed-use private sector projects that the Honourable Member for Christchurch West is now tracking for me on a weekly basis, and I refer specifically to the Pierhead project, the Royalton project in Old Town, the Beaches project by the Sanders Group, Margaritaville and Indigo. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, I will make as a document of the House the numbers that will show that in the case of the Hyatt, it is intended to all of the information there. I'm not going to go through all of it because we've done it before. The crane expansion, beaches construction, there's to be a Cineplex and commercial center for $50 million at Welch's, the Porter's Townhouse development at $20 million, the Nikki Beach Hotel, which will be redone at $40 million, the St. Lawrence Bay Marina that will see a marina go in by St. Lawrence Gap on the back of where Pablo's Churrasco, I think that's what it was called, going right up to the Divi South Winds Hotel. Hotel Indigo, which has already seen the Caribbean Hotel knock down the old site, and Hotel Indigo is starting there, we expect, by the middle of the year. And then, of course, the Lower State Warehouse project. Mr. Speaker, cumulatively, these few projects here represent at least $850 million in investment, and will see employment of 6,046 construction workers roughly, and 4,185 jobs once construction is completed. Mr. Speaker, they will result in the course of the next 3 years to 1,429 additional rooms. I should say to you that those who think that this is pie in the sky, one of the projects here is the Sagicor Estates. You only need to pass by Boarded Hall and see the extent to which those buildings, which I broke ground on about 18 months ago, have been continuing in very, very good peak. And those numbers do not include, Mr. Speaker, the new Barbados Fire Service Station and mechanical workshop that is being built. It does not include, Mr. Speaker, the housing program that I just spoke about. It does not include the completion of the shallow draft and the work that is being done in the Bridgetown port there. It does not include, Apes Hill is in that one, and that's there, but it does not include the redevelopment of Queen's Park as a cultural hub, nor indeed the other things I talked about in Bridgetown. And I am sure that the conditions that we do and the completion of the Constitution Road redevelopment project and the Salt Pond, both of which are coming to a closure very shortly. It does not include the construction of a vehicle pound at Workman's in St. George, so we can take all of those vehicles that are sitting down in the old Glenderry prison and be able to deal with them effectively. It does not include, Mr. Speaker, the roads, the Scotland District project that I signed the framework agreement with the Chinese government for, that the Deputy Prime Minister will soon undertake the commencement of it, that will deal with all of our roads in the Scotland District over the next 3 to 4 years, spending 230 million Barbados to stabilize bridges and build roads up there. It does not include, Mr. Speaker, the Water Authority capital projects to which we referred earlier. Mr. Speaker, in addition, we recognize that it therefore means greater efficiency in the public sector ministries that have to manage, and it is for that reason that I have appointed a minister charged with daily supervision of infrastructure in this country, because the growth must happen for us to get out of this awful hole that the pandemic put us in. At the same time, Mr. Speaker, and I know that people are tired, but are asking because this is important. This country is in too difficult a place, and I therefore am praying upon people's time a little more, because these things are important. We recognize and promised in the manifesto that we will transfer all of the equipment in the Ministry of Public Works, large heavy-duty equipment, to UCAL, so that UCAL will have an additional revenue stream, and I've asked the Minister of Public Works, Deputy Prime Minister, to put a working group in place so that they can settle the arrangements with UCAL for the commercial terms on which the equipment will be transferred to UCAL, and equally the commercial terms upon which the government will lease back the equipment, meaning that we will only be paying when equipment is working. Because there are too many instances of the government of Barbados in the last 15 years having equipment not working and men hired and not being in a position to do any work because the equipment is not there in a position to work. Food and nutrition revolution, sir. It is an unfortunate truth that 100 years ago in Barbados, for many, there was a lack of food, but the nutritional quality of the food that was available was high. There was less food, but high nutrition. Today, food is abundant, but the nutritional quality is inferior. And that is why my government has chosen not only to speak about food security, but food and nutritional security, as we introduced when we hosted UNCTAD in October of last year. Unfortunately, in many instances, technological advancement in food production has been driven by profits, as opposed to advancing nutritional quality. On one hand, you have ultra-processed, easily available foods with high sugar content and salt content. On the other hand, you have a decline in nutritional content in crops. A global crisis of soil depletion, which we signed an MOU yesterday with the soil movement in order to be able to help change, because quite frankly, by 2050, the world expects that the soils that we have will not generate sufficient yield to be able to feed the people of this world. Mr. Speaker, we also have to deal with animal rearing practices that are designed to improve yield, but not human safety. The One Health Global Initiative, which I chair, also deals with abuse of antibiotics in the livestock industry, and not just by human beings. When you think about the interruption in the global supply that we suffered during the pandemic, sir, and you add to that the instability we are about to suffer again through the war and conflicts, and then you add to that the health crisis of the chronic NCDs, which is why I've asked the member for St. Philip North to take specific responsibility for leading the battle against chronic NCDs in this country, then it becomes clear why the judgment of my government is that we need a revolution in food and nutritional security. We need to move people away from eating the bad things each and every day. If you eat macaroni pie twice a month or 3 times a month even, you could get away once you're exercising. But when you're eating it 3 and 4 times a week, there's a heart attack on stilts coming at you. When you're eating jam puffs and meat rolls and turnovers every day, and I don't have anything against bakeries, I want them to succeed. But once again, everything with moderation. Mr. Speaker, our vision is therefore to facilitate Barbadians moving past eating for just a belly full to the point where we eat for health, wellness, and enjoyment in every delicious bite. Fresh and wholesome nutritious food is the daily medicine that is needed to tackle the high incidence of chronic NCDs. To this end, we are committed to repositioning our farmers, to deliver on this mandate, and to reverse our healthcare bill and to give Bajans the best quality of life possible. Mr. Speaker, the high consumption of foods with high sugar and high salt continues to undermine the efforts to fight chronic NCDs. Against this background, I therefore now propose to further raise the excise tax on sweetened beverages. It was raised to 10% in 2017, and we will now raise it from the 1st of April 2022 to 20% as a further signal to manufacturers and consumers that we need to curb our sugar intake. The Ministry of Health and Wellness will work with stakeholders to further identify those items with high salt content in order to impose a similar tariff mid-year, so that in October, when we come to the mid-year review, we intend to put other products with high salt content on this list. Mr. Speaker, it is always our preference to work with manufacturers of these sweetened beverages to reduce the level of the sugars and salts, and therefore the Ministry of Health and Wellness will develop nutritional guidelines with sugar and salt content that are acceptable, and manufacturers, including those within communities, will be given an appropriate time frame to transition to the new standards. The onus, my friends, Mr. Speaker, is on manufacturers to fall within these guidelines rather than to have a Minister of Finance intervene at the level of taxation. Drop the level of sugar, drop the level of salt, and they drop the level of prices. The level of prices will drop concomitantly. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Agriculture and Food and Nutritional Security has been tasked with the goal also of reducing our domestic food bill by 25% by 2025, as is the case with the regional goals. That is why we have made the changes to the water rates for farmers today. That is why we are advancing on the sanitary and phytosanitary legislation. That is why we call for the public-private partnership between BADMC and the owners of Lear's Plantation for the lease of 100 acres of land to be able to facilitate at least 150 new farmers. To date, 139 persons have responded to the invitations for expressions of interest regarding the project, and it will also have a vending area. And as I said, the Barbados-Guyana Food Terminal will also be located on that site. The target date for completion of all land work, including placement, is the 31st of July of this year, so that thereafter we expect, when you pass through Lears, to see an abundance of activity in agriculture. We fully expect that the reservoir will be completed in October of this year, and that will hold 21 million gallons of water to facilitate the farming in that district. Sir, the reality is that despite all of the government's will, we are still a small land space constrained by limited land space. And that is why we as Barbados will become cooperating with our colleagues in Guyana and Suriname and Belize and Dominica and St. Lucia and St. Vincent and Grenada and Trinidad and Tobago to get agricultural production in this region up to the levels that make sense. Of course, Jamaica as well. This is why, Mr. Speaker, we also want to be able to have the product of the black belly sheep project be successful. In keeping, sir, with our marine conservation guidelines, we will also facilitate the development of technology-enabled marine farms. And there are all over the world examples of these ocean farms successfully growing everything from seaweed to clams to shrimp and a vast variety of fish. If we are to be healthy, then we need also to be consuming more fish, more seafood generally, not necessarily those that are loaded with cholesterol, though. We intend, therefore, to ensure, Mr. Speaker, that to be the best versions of ourselves, how we grow our food, how we process food, how we prepare our food, and how we consume our food must all matter. Sir, the digital revolution. And you understand why I am hopeful that this economy will grow, because these are not projects or priorities that are just being done by one or two persons. Every minister has responsibility to deliver on these growth projects, Mr. Speaker, so that we are not putting pie-in-the-sky things here. We are putting what is immediately on the desk of ministers, because we have the benefit of the continuity in governance rather than simply being a 6-week-old government. Mr. Speaker, in order for us to hit the ambitious growth, therefore, we have to take some calculated risks. It's no different than batting in Test cricket, and we're going to see a lot of that hopefully in the next few days, and hopefully it will be a little better than a draw. Especially since the last time that they were here, we beat England in 3 days after the first investment of us as a government in 2018 saw that we put that money to make sure that the test match came here. I am hopeful that we can see a repetition. Sir, you can have the most solid defense and occupy the crease, but if you plan to score some runs, you have to play a few shots. And we're going to have to play some shots. Fully tapping into the digital economy is undoubtedly one of those shots that we must learn to master. We have made some progress by digitizing some few key components of government operations and service delivery. I thank the member for St. Philip West for her tenure as the Minister of Innovation, Science and Technology and digitizing many of the services that we now have in this country and that we take for granted, from the certificate of character right back down. I have every confidence that the Minister, currently the member for the St. Michael North, will continue in this respect. We are very shortly going to roll out the new Barbados Digital ID, of which the country has heard some things about. But the truth is, sir, to advance at the pace that we need to do much more and much faster. And that is why my government will develop a GovTech-type agency resource mandated and empowered to digitize and improve the delivery of public services. We saw only the risks that we face as recent as last Thursday, when there were attempts at ransomware attacks at 2 or 3 departments within the government service. We will, Mr. Speaker, if we get the GovTech agency going, we get the digital ID going, we are in a position to fast-track the smart society, Barbados transforming into a smart society. That is why, sir, we are at advanced stages of creating a partnership, a strategic partnership with one of the leading cybersecurity companies in the world. They are taking the step for the purpose of defense, because we cannot afford for the kinds of attacks, as I said, to stop us from going forward. And Mr. Speaker, once that audit is completed, then we will be in a position to know what else we have to do. Mr. Speaker, this step is also about offense. Transforming Barbados into a digitally enhanced and digitally secure country will significantly boost our global competitiveness. In 2022 and beyond, global travelers and business will prioritize going to places where they feel that their money, their data, and their identity is safe. Nobody's going to be coming here if they feel they're going to be a victim of identity theft, or that they're going to get their money stolen, or that their data taken. Also, sir, we have already created a FinTech industry advisory group to help us arrive at the right overall balance between innovation and protection. We have no intention of becoming an arbiter of technology. We are open to all cutting-edge technology and ideas. We want them to develop and thrive. FinTech and the emerging virtual assets industry with its cryptocurrencies, DAOs and NFTs, non-fungible tokens, for those who don't know, is an exciting space, and we believe that there are many ways that Barbados can benefit from it. For my government, sir, financial regulation is centered around overarching principles, rather than specific rules that will quickly become outdated or worked around. Our principle, sir, is that as a small society, we must avoid systemic contagion, and we must protect vulnerable customers. The principal tools of protecting vulnerable customers are tech-neutral, things like whether the seller is fit and a proper individual, avoiding mis-selling and conflicts of interest, having appropriate capital and liquidity requirements where sellers make promises to people, and of course, applying international standards of anti-money laundering compliance. We are especially open to new technologies that will help us achieve these safeguards quickly and cheaply. That is why, Mr. Speaker, my government has started conversations with the leadership of the largest cryptocurrency company in the world, Binance, about Barbados becoming a global hub for FinTech investment and innovation with them. Sir, we will find the right balance for regulation, being a tool to always protect our citizens, always avoid systemic contagion, but at the same time have a competitive advantage in this global economy that is becoming more difficult to navigate. Also, sir, the long-awaited national digital payments ecosystem will come to a reality in October of this year. I can't tell you how long it has been for me to wait to see that happen, sir. The last set of payment service providers are in the final round of testing so that we can have the widest possible participation from the outset. I'm told that there are 2 banks already, First Caribbean and Republic Bank, that have completed their processes, and we await the others. The Ministry of Finance, therefore, to that end, will proclaim the National Payment System legislation and the Fair Credit Reporting legislation, both of which have already passed the Parliament, on the 15th of April 2022. to provide sufficient lead time with respect to the introduction of appropriate regulations. Thereafter, sir, by the end of April of 2022, we will set up a National Payments Council to oversee the rollout of the new payments ecosystem. Mr. Speaker, the credit union movement has made leaps and bounds since its establishment some 40 years ago. Today, with the advancement and utilization of technology, we feel the movement is well poised to play an even more vital role in achieving financial inclusion and democratizing the financial sector. This is a movement that almost all Barbadian households turn to. Whether it is finance and housing, renewable energy, infrastructure, you name it, this is the movement that makes things happen for ordinary people in this country. To that end, we welcome their full participation within the payment ecosystem and look forward to further innovation to make it easier for persons to invest in either government securities or commercial securities or even peer-to-peer lending facilities. We should be able to pick up a phone and invest in those just as easy as we make a phone call or write a text. Further, the Ministry of Finance will over the course of the coming months bring legislation to this Parliament to establish deposit insurance for the credit union movement. This has been a long-awaited issue for them, and we are happy to be able to move in this direction. I must caution the movement that as the asset of the movement continues to grow apace, there must be, however, greater attention paid to the corporate governance structures of these institutions, and I've asked the Financial Services Commission to ensure that we can strengthen the regulatory framework for the credit union movement as a matter of necessity. Sir, finally, the orange economy and heritage. And I will only say, Mr. Speaker, that Barbados continues, as we know, to always punch above its weight. And we've done so in cricket, and we've done so, Mr. Speaker, as the birthplace of rum and the maker of the world's best rums, I dare say. On 166 square miles, we've not hosted one, but we've hosted 2 World Cup finals. 2 World Cup finals, 2007, I think 2010. And Barbados' contribution to the development of these $200 billion plus industries is unquestionable. Yet we earn very little from cricket and not as much as we would like from rum. To this end, therefore, my government will invest in and prioritize the expansion of Barbados' and Bajan's ability to earn from the global rum industry and the global cricket industry. Both of these have the potential to become billion-dollar subsectors for us. We will work with the rum producers and investors to build a clear roadmap for industry growth, a roadmap focused on high-valued production of global exports. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, we would do well to recall that the Cognac region in France is less than 6 square miles, but produces billions of dollars into global spirits sales annually, and with all types of ranges, with jobs and high-value jobs in IP and finance and chemistry and energy and design. So why can't we do the same in this country, sir? As for cricket, Mr. Speaker, we will act on our commitment to create a cabinet advisory subcommittee and invest $1 million to start, as I said, for the boosting of cricket in this country. Once again, it was the provisions of the COVID pandemic that have put all of this on pause, but we have every confidence that we can have an industry in cricket in Barbados and that we can export elements of that industry, in particular to Africa. I add to this, Mr. Speaker, sir, the commitment also to the road tennis industry and to ensure that we stabilize and structure an appropriate framework such that other nations across the world will pick up road tennis, sir. With respect to the community sports, sir, we will transform the work and impact of the National Sports Council. We are working to ensure, and we are waiting on the Chinese government to get back to us on the National Sports Council commitment to have a new national stadium at Waterford. We are also, however, without prejudice to that, building 15 mini stadia at locations across the entire country. In addition, sir, those 15 mini stadia will all have a limited number of mobile bleachers which can be shared for larger events when needed. And of course, sir, we are putting in place 85 lights on 85 grounds across the island so that our population can spend more time at night being able to conduct themselves in sports. Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to go into detail on the heritage and creative economy. Suffice it to say that we've already spoken about the Reclaiming Our Atlantic Destiny project, which will see the Barbados Heritage District at Newton completed, and the government will seek to put in some seed money, but we accept that the majority of money for these projects will be raised internationally as part of our Global Outreach and Reparations Movement program. Similarly, sir, we will see also the creation of the transformation of one of our old sugar factories or sugar plantations into a creative district with a sound stage, and will also the commitment to create opportunities for global film, music, and video games. Mr. Speaker, this is not pie in the sky. The people have already started to visit and are looking, and we've been having discussions with people from Bollywood to be able to have a train of work come through. Members of the country may be aware that we've been fortunate to be able to host the filming of Outer Banks, one of the top series on Netflix, over the course of the last few weeks. And this is the second time that they've come to Barbados, having been here last year to do some of their filming as well. This is where this economy must go, sir. In addition, we are also committed to facilitating the development of the 52-week entertainment calendar, recognizing that we need to keep our entertainers, our producers, and our creatives earning. And Mr. Speaker, you will see that is where we did a number of digital programs with digital content over the course of the last year, even during COVID. We know it was an awful period, but we are confident that we can work with them to continue to expand their services both locally and internationally. And in particular, the 52-week entertainment calendar is critical for them. Sir, as we close, let me reflect that it matters not only what we do, but how we do it. And to that end, my government remains committed to the reforms of governance to which we have spoken and to which the President of our nation addressed at the opening of this Parliament. It is against this backdrop that we expect that we will be bringing to Parliament in this financial year, starting in April 2022, the legislation as well as the monetary resources needed to establish people's assemblies as recommended by the Thorne Commission report. In addition, we will also be providing for the functioning of 3 critical commissions that are necessary to deal with critical areas of our country. One, the Constitutional Review Commission, to which we referred, and which will now be chaired by Justice Christopher Blackman, and will start its work within a matter of weeks. The Commission on Parliamentary Reform, to be chaired by Sir Richard Cheltenham, which will also start its work, Mr. Speaker, before the end of May. And indeed, Mr. Speaker, a new deal for the community of differently able and disabled persons commission will be chaired by the Honourable Member for St. James North, who has already exhibited a commitment in this area. We expect that the work of all 3 commissions will start, and in the case of 2 of them, be completed in the next fiscal year. Mr. Speaker, we expect that the conversations on the common entrance and the conversations on the reform of our welfare system and the Child Care Board and the National Assistance Board will also be undertaken with pace over the course of the next year. And Mr. Speaker, with respect to the matter of labour, we are committed to working with the labour movement to improve the terms and conditions of all of our workers in this country in the private and public sector. In particular, sir, I want to remind persons that there has not been an increase in the allowances in the public service since 2009. Against that backdrop, sir, my government has taken a decision that the negotiations with the labour movement for increase in allowances will start in September of this year to be able to close the gap on those matters of allowances that have remained untouched for regrettably 13 years. Similarly, sir, we are committed, yes, to a regrading exercise in the public service. But before we do this, we must address the issue of the future of work in Barbados, looking at the issues such as hours of work and overtime, and from where do people work in a post-COVID environment. I intend, Mr. Speaker, to meet with the social partnership in the fiscal year in April to determine how best we may address this, given that some of the work was already started by the social partnership with the review of jobs and work in the public sector and generally. And I hope, Mr. Speaker, we can therefore build on that to determine how best work will look in this country before we go into the regrading exercise. The last regrading exercise was completed in 2006 or 7, and therefore we are due for one to start. This does not happen overnight, and typically it takes about 18 months to 2 years to be completed. Mr. Speaker, we also will see during the course of the next year the introduction of the Trade Union Recognition Bill, which is before the Social Partnership and which has been like the Holy Grail long in coming, sir. We trust, sir, that all of these initiatives will lead to a fairer and better functioning Barbados. It is against this backdrop, Mr. Speaker, I also commit to dealing with a few bugbears, day-to-day bugbears that I take responsibility now myself, along with the Deputy Prime Minister, to removing from our landscape. Some of these will require change in systems. For example, the late payments in the public service for persons who have worked in good faith. It must stop. And I've already spoken to the Ministry of Finance about us taking a chance on people, and if people do the wrong thing and are inappropriately paid, we will get back the money, but we must shift the burden of proof as to how people are paid in this country. Some things, sir, will require greater levels of training in customer service to create a more respectful, customer-centric culture in the public service. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Simple. Some will require our addressing the unacceptable backlog as at the licensing authority and other government departments. It also relates to ensuring that we have a human face, Mr. Speaker, in interacting with persons as they wait long hours, in some instances for services, for example, at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital or at the Grantley Adams Airport. We need to be able to ensure that people are treated appropriately while having to wait on the delivery of services in this country. That is how we must judge ourselves. None of us want to wait. Therefore, when we make people wait, we therefore make sure that the experience is as pleasant as possible. And if that means hiring hostesses or other people to come to work every day to be able to do that, then that is what we must do, Mr. Speaker. We appreciate that nobody doesn't like to part with money. But you can imagine that we got people lining up to give money, and we still got them lining up? No, Mr. Speaker, that got to come to an end. We will complete, sir, the task, as I said, that we've started, and the digital payments framework will hopefully aid in a lot of these matters that are still bugbears. Mr. Speaker, it also requires us to undertake comprehensive public education and training. We have committed to making the Bajan citizenship module available to all Bajans for training. And we've also committed to reintroducing civics in our schools, because we must all become better citizens. But we must also equally address matters to close other information gaps. You heard me talk about the garbage cans. We need to be able to, SSA must settle a policy for recycling and educate Bajans so that the recycling bins that they receive can be appropriately used. And similarly, to educate Bajans that we don't just leave the garbage can outside the house, but we bring it in and just bring it out on the day that the SSA is coming to collect the garbage. If not, it is going to be lost or vandalized at some point. Mr. Speaker, I also hope that we will close the information gap, and the member for Christchurch East knows that I'm on his back on these matters, on the how-to videos, how to grow a kitchen garden that the Minister of Agriculture promised me to do, how to be able to get a mortgage, how to be able to do all kinds of things that ordinary citizens may not have somebody in the household to ask a question from. The state must act in loco parentis for the people of this nation in giving them the skill set to be better citizens in this country, sir. Mr. Speaker, we must also insist on accountability from those who provide services to the government of Barbados. The notion that we will spend the kind of money that we spent on Highway 1 and still have to go through between the road and the manhole covers has to come to an end. And I've instructed, Mr. Speaker, that I will be very upset and will hold to account the payment of any retention sums to any contractor that has not fixed those things that they're supposed to fix before paying. Retention sums are kept back in order to fix defects in a contract. And I expect equally the utility companies, not just the private ones, but the public ones too, to be held accountable for when they break the road and do not reinstate the road for which there is a moral and a contractual obligation so to do. I am speaking equally of the Water Authority and the NPC, and not just private utility companies. Mr. Speaker, these day-to-day issues matter because they present a nuisance to our people, and they present an obstacle to our government being able to move forward faster than we are so doing. And if we want to position ourselves as a first world nation, if we want to position ourselves as a nation giving world-class services, then we must fix these bugbears as well, and not just the grand things that enfranchise our citizens to become owners in their own land. I therefore, sir, Mr. Speaker, know that we will work together to get this right. The beauty of the COVID pandemic was the continuous conversations. Yes, you might even say talk too much sometimes, but the truth is that we don't get anywhere without conversation and communication. And if we are going to avoid the challenges of 2035 with climate, with population deficit, and even with our debt, then we must start to do these things. What communities have been affected by coastal erosion? Ask the member for St. Peter. Ask him what 6 Bends used to look like before the people on the coast could no longer keep their houses there. This thing is real. If you want to know about the saltwater incursion in our wells, ask the member for St. Michael Southeast, who is now the minister, or any of the others who served as the minister for the Water Authority. These things are real. If you want to find out about the flooding and the damage going Chapman Lane, going Murphy's Pasture, and ask the people what happens to them when the canal used to back up and all the water going in the houses and destroying everything. Mr. Speaker, if we want to know about the vagaries of population deficit, we only need to look at those countries in the world who do not have sufficient young people coming to work to provide for the social security of the older members, and whose output is compromised because they don't have enough people coming to work every day. Mr. Speaker, these are the threats that we face in 2035, and that is why we ask the people of this country to give us their confidence so that we can prepare this country to avoid those conflicts, avoid those challenges. And Mr. Speaker, ironically, by 2035 too, our debt to GDP ratio is supposed to be down to the fiscal anchor of 60% debt to GDP ratio. That is a discussion that we must continue to have. And in fact, Mr. Speaker, the truth is that we have not yet made any decisions as to where we are going with the IMF program that comes to an end this year. But suffice it that we are now in the stage of conducting discussions locally and internationally to see what our best options are. Conscious that we are about to see an increase in interest rates across the world, and conscious that the funds from the IMF are still the cheapest in town, but more than that, they unlock other expenditure in the development institutions that we have been able to unlock over the course of the last few years. And I thank the member for St. Michael South Central for playing that role in helping us to unlock all of those policy-based loans over the course of the last few years. Mr. Speaker, this is what we face as a nation. And I say to you that whatever decision it is, the conversations will not be kept in private, but that we will have full conversations with the social partnership. And whatever decision we make will be after full consultation locally, regionally, and internationally. But back to 2022, Mr. Speaker. We know all that we face. And I've laid it out as much as I can this evening on behalf of a government that is anxious to do well, challenged in the environment which we face internationally, but committed to being people-centric and rooted in the principles of our covenant of hope. We, Mr. Speaker, have laid out that our objective is to be able to trigger inclusive, fair and inclusive growth, and to shield those least capable of shielding themselves. And Mr. Speaker, we have set out a program that looks at cross-cutting themes to trigger growth, while at the same time tackling some difficult issues that this society has kicked down the road, in some instances for 7 decades, as with the Underground Water Control Act, and in some instances for 35 years, as with the pension reform, and in the case of the NPC, for about 15 years. Mr. Speaker, this is but one speech. The lessons of COVID and managing it taught us that we can come back and talk often as a family. We will keep our core values and we will focus on what matters most, keeping our people safe and ensuring the well-being of our people. We shall also be nimble in our actions, but rooted in those principles. Mr. Speaker, 2021 was a test of my government's philosophy, that when we prepare together and when we journey together, we come through together. We arrive at our desired destination together. For I believe, sir, that while it may be riskier and there may even be a more uncertain world as we have expressed in this year, if we hold to our covenants, if we leave no one behind, if we share the burden and equally share the benefits, if we pay forward, if we plan and we prepare for a better future, if we recognize that all our people must be owners and not tenants in the land of their birth, Mr. Speaker, I have every confidence, sir, that there is nothing that our people in this great nation of Barbados cannot achieve. Let us to the task work together and recognize that however great the challenge, that we were raised by a resilient people to overcome it. And our commitment to work hand in hand with each other shall guarantee that success in the land of our birth. I'm obliged to you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, sir, I beg to move that this bill be now read a second time. The appropriation bill of 2022 to 2023 be now read a second time. Thank you. And reserve your right to speak, Skipper. And reserve your right to speak. No problem. Should we start with something else? Or was that three? Start at three, we did three today.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to move the suspension of the House until tomorrow, the 15th of March at 3 p.m.
The question is that the Honourable Chamber be suspended until 3 p.m. in the afternoon. All the Honourable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We take yes or no. This Honourable Chamber stands suspended until the 15th day of March 2022 at 3 p.m.